The stagecoach rattled to a halt in a cloud of dust and dying sunlight, and Caleb Ward felt his stomach tighten with something he couldn't quite name. Anticipation, maybe, or dread. Hard to tell the difference when you were about to meet a woman you'd never seen before. A woman you'd agreed to marry based on nothing but 3 letters and a faded photograph that could have been anyone. He stood alone on the edge of Medicine Bow, Wyoming, a town so small it barely earned the name. Behind him, false-fronted buildings leaned against the wind like tired old men. The saloon, the general store, the church nobody attended anymore. All of it perched on the edge of nothing, surrounded by endless grassland that stretched toward mountains so distant they looked like rumors. The stage driver, a grizzled man named Hutchins, climbed down with a grunt, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Got your package, Ward," he said, and there was something in his tone Caleb didn't like. Something almost pitying. The door opened. Caleb had prepared himself for disappointment. Mail-order brides were often desperate women fleeing desperate circumstances. He'd expected someone plain, worn down by hardship, grateful for any escape. What he got was a ghost. She emerged slowly, one gloved hand gripping the doorframe like she might fall without it. Mid-20s, he guessed. Dark hair pinned back so tightly it looked painful. Her dress was fine, too fine for frontier travel, deep blue wool with buttons up to her throat despite the lingering heat of late summer. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Beautiful, yes. Delicate features, pale skin, gray eyes that might have been striking if they held any light at all. But they didn't. They were flat, empty, like windows in an abandoned house. And there was something else, a careful blankness in her expression, as if she'd practiced erasing herself. "Mrs. Ward," he said, removing his hat. The name felt strange in his mouth, formal and foreign. "I'm Caleb. Welcome to Medicine Bow." "Mr. Ward." Her voice was soft, cultured, Eastern. She didn't smile. Didn't meet his eyes for more than a second before looking past him at the town, and he saw something flicker across her face. Disappointment, maybe. Or resignation. Hutchins tossed down a single trunk, expensive leather, scuffed at the corners, and climbed back up to his seat without another word. The stage pulled away, leaving them alone in the settling dust. Caleb reached for the trunk. "Let me get that for you." "No." The word came out sharp, almost panicked. She caught herself, softened her tone. "Thank you, but I can manage." She couldn't. The trunk was heavy, and when she bent to lift it, her sleeve rode up just enough. Caleb saw it before she could hide it. A bracelet of bruises around her left wrist, dark purple against pale skin. Finger marks. Someone had grabbed her, held her tight enough to leave an impression. Their eyes met. For half a second he saw raw terror, and then it was gone, replaced by that careful nothing. "I've got it," he said quietly, taking the trunk despite her protest. It weighed almost nothing in his hands, but he could feel the weight of what he'd just seen pressing down on him like a physical thing. They walked toward his wagon in silence. The town watched, faces in windows, shadows on porches. Medicine Bow didn't get many strangers, and a mail-order bride was news worth noting. Caleb could already hear the gossip forming, feel the weight of curious eyes following them. "The ranch is about an hour north," he said, loading the trunk into the wagon bed. "Not much to look at yet, but the land's good. Water rights, decent grazing. I've got a small herd started, couple 100 head." "That sounds fine." She climbed up to the seat without waiting for help, moving with a strange stiffness, as if her body hurt. Because it does, Caleb thought, because someone hurt her. He took the reins, clicked to the horses, and they rolled out of town. The silence between them felt heavy, loaded with everything neither of them was saying. Caleb had never been good with words, but this was different. This was a woman who'd traveled 1,500 miles to marry a stranger, and she looked like she might shatter if he spoke too loud. "I should tell you," he started, keeping his voice low and even. "I don't expect... the marriage can be in name only, for now, until you're comfortable." Something in her posture eased, just slightly. "Thank you. I sleep in the barn most nights anyway during summer. House is yours. I've got a spare room set up, bed's decent, and... Mr. Ward." She turned to look at him directly for the first time, and he saw exhaustion so deep it went beyond physical. "You don't have to explain. I understand the arrangement. You needed a wife. I needed to leave Boston. That's all this is. Boston. So that's where she'd come from. Money, by the look of her clothes. Education, by the sound of her voice. And something bad enough to make her flee to the edge of the world and marry a man she'd never met. The sun was setting now, painting the grassland gold and red. In different circumstances, it might have been romantic. Instead, it just made Lydia look more fragile, more out of place. She belonged in parlors and drawing rooms, not on a wagon rolling through wild country where the nearest neighbor was 10 miles away, and winter could kill you if you made one wrong choice. What made you leave? The question slipped out before Caleb could stop it. Her hands tightened in her lap. I'd rather not discuss it. Fair enough. He let it drop, but his mind kept circling back to those bruises. Fresh, by the look of them. Recent. Which meant whoever put them there might still be looking for her. The ranch appeared as darkness fell. A small wooden house barely more than a cabin, with a barn and a few outbuildings scattered across a valley between low hills. Modest, isolated, probably disappointing to a woman used to city comforts. But it was defensible, Caleb noted. Good sight lines, water nearby, and far enough from town that trouble would be visible long before it arrived. Not that he expected trouble, but that was the thing about trouble. It rarely announced itself. He helped her down from the wagon, careful not to touch her more than necessary. She flinched anyway, just a slight pullback when his hand brushed her elbow. I'll show you inside, he said, carrying her trunk up the porch steps. The door stuck. It always did, and he had to shoulder it open, making a mental note to plane it down before winter. Inside, he'd done his best to make it welcoming. Swept the floors, aired out the musty smell, put fresh linens on the bed in what was now her room. It still looked rough, bachelor quarters barely civilized, but it was clean. Lydia stood in the doorway, taking it in. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Simple furniture, nothing fancy. 2 doors leading to small bedrooms. It's not much, Caleb said, suddenly aware of how inadequate it must seem to her. But it's solid. Keeps the wind out, mostly. It's fine. She said it automatically, the same way she'd said everything else. Polite, distant, empty. He set her trunk down in her room, then back toward the door. I'll leave you to settle in. There's food in the cold box if you're hungry. Bread, some cheese, jerked beef. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Mr. Ward, she stopped him at the threshold. Why did you do this? Marry a stranger? Caleb considered lying, giving her some romantic notion about loneliness or wanting a family. But she'd been honest about their arrangement being practical, so he owed her the same. Ranch this size needs at least 2 people to run properly. I can't afford to pay hands year-round, and the work's too much for one. Figured a wife made more sense than a business partner. He paused. Plus, winters here are hard, long, quiet. Gets to a man after a while. She nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she already knew. Practical reasons. I appreciate your honesty. What about you? Why'd you really leave Boston? For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, because staying would have killed me. The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrible. Before Caleb could respond, she stepped back and closed the door, ending the conversation. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the rough wood, then turned and walked out into the night. The barn was dark and familiar, smelling of hay and horses and leather. He bedded down in the tack room like he'd said he would, but sleep didn't come easy, because staying would have killed me. And those bruises on her wrist, dark as sin in the dying light. Caleb Ward had survived 2 years in this harsh country by minding his own business and keeping his head down. But lying there in the dark, listening to the wind whisper against the barn walls, he made a decision that would change everything. Whatever had hurt Lydia Mercer, whoever, would never touch her again. Not while he drew breath. He just didn't know yet how much that promise would cost. Morning came cold and bright. Caleb woke to the sound of his rooster crowing and the soft shuffle of horses in their stalls. His back ached from sleeping on the cot, but he'd had worse. He pulled on his boots, splashed water on his face from the barrel outside, and headed for the house. Smoke rose from the chimney. He stopped, surprised. Through the window, he could see movement inside. Lydia, already up, doing something at the stove. When he entered, the smell of coffee hit him first. Real coffee, not the chicory and grounds mixture he'd been stretching for weeks. Lydia stood at the stove, still wearing yesterday's dress, hair already pinned back in that same painful-looking style. "Morning," he said, removing his hat. She turned, and in the daylight, he could see she hadn't slept. Dark circles under her eyes, skin even paler than yesterday. But she'd made an effort. Breakfast sat on the table. Biscuits, bacon, eggs. More food than he usually bothered with. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I found the stores. I'll need to know what you prefer for meals and when—" "This is fine. More than fine." He sat, suddenly awkward in his own house. She'd transformed it overnight, made it feel less like a place a man camped and more like a home. "You didn't have to go to trouble." "It's not trouble. It's my responsibility." That word, responsibility, said everything about how she viewed this arrangement, a transaction, a duty to fulfill. He wondered what kind of life taught a woman to think of herself that way. They ate in silence. The food was good, better than anything he'd managed on his own, but Lydia barely touched hers. Just pushed eggs around her plate and sipped coffee with hands that shook slightly when she thought he wasn't looking. "I need to check the herd this morning," Caleb said, finishing his coffee. "Probably be gone most of the day. You'll be all right here alone?" Something flickered in her eyes, fear maybe, or relief. "Of course. There's a rifle above the door, loaded. You know how to use one?" "No." "I'll teach you then, tomorrow." He stood, reaching for his hat, then carefully, "Those bruises on your wrist. You get any more anywhere else?" The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you—" "I'm not asking for the story, not yet. I'm asking if you're hurt anywhere else. Because if you are, there's a doctor in town. Not much of one, but he's discreet." Lydia's jaw tightened. For a moment, Caleb thought she might keep denying it. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "Where?" "It doesn't matter. They're healing." "It matters to me." He kept his voice level, non-threatening. "I won't push. But if you need help, medical or otherwise, you tell me. That's part of our arrangement, too." She looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to figure out whether he meant it. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she gave another small nod. "Thank you, Mr. Ward." "Caleb," he corrected. "We're married, even if it's just on paper. Might as well use first names." "Caleb, then." She tested the name, her accent making it sound almost foreign. "And you may call me Lydia." He left her there and spent the day writing fence lines, checking water sources, counting cattle. The work was mindless, repetitive, which gave him too much time to think. About Lydia, about Boston, about what kind of man left marks like that on a woman's skin. Rich, probably, powerful. Because Lydia wasn't running from some common brute. She was running from someone who had resources, influence. Otherwise, why come all the way to Wyoming? Why not just move to another city, another state? Unless she'd already tried that. Unless he'd found her before. The thought made Caleb's hands tighten on the reins. He'd seen men like that during the war. Officers who thought rank gave them the right to do anything they wanted. He'd killed 2 of them for trying to force themselves on a camp follower. Spent a month in the stockade for it. No regrets. By the time he rode back to the ranch, the sun was setting again. He unsaddled his horse, fed the animals, and headed for the house. Through the window, he could see Lydia moving around inside, preparing dinner probably. Normal. Domestic. The kind of scene he'd imagined when he first decided to find a wife. Except for the way she moved, careful, controlled, like someone expecting a blow at any moment. He washed up at the pump, then went inside. Dinner was waiting, stew, fresh bread, canned peaches for dessert. Lydia had found his meager supplies and somehow turned them into a proper meal. "This is good," he said, meaning it. "You don't have to cook like this every day. Simple's fine." "I don't mind. It gives me something to do." She picked at her own bowl, barely eating again. "You need to eat more than that. Work here's hard, even inside. Can't do it on air and coffee." "I'm not hungry." "Lydia." He waited until she looked at him. "I'm not going to force you. But I'm going to notice when you don't eat, don't sleep, look like you're about to collapse. So let's make a deal. You try to take care of yourself, and I'll mind my own business about the rest. Fair?" She studied him for a long moment. "Why do you care?" Because you're my wife, and because he stopped, choosing his words carefully. Because I know what it's like to feel like you can't let your guard down. After the war, I was like that for a while. Took time to learn safe again. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. You fought in the war? 4 years, Union, cavalry, mostly. That must have been terrible. Had its moments. He didn't elaborate. Didn't tell her about the things he'd seen, the things he'd done. Some stories didn't need telling. Point is, I understand not wanting to talk about the past, but I need you to understand something too. You're safe here. I meant what I said yesterday. Whatever you're running from, whoever, they'll have to go through me to get to you. Lydia's hand went to her wrist, covering the bruises through her sleeve. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know who... She stopped herself, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. He won't find me here. No one knows where I went. You sure about that? I'm sure. I was very careful. Caleb wasn't convinced, but he let it drop. They finished dinner in silence, and afterward, Lydia insisted on cleaning up alone. He went outside to check the animals one more time, then headed for the barn. He was halfway across the yard when he heard it, a sharp cry from the house, quickly cut off. Caleb ran. He burst through the door to find Lydia backed against the wall, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other clutching a dishcloth. On the floor at her feet lay the pieces of a broken plate. Sorry, she gasped, voice shaking. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It slipped. I'll clean it up. I'm sorry. She was trembling all over, eyes wide with fear that had nothing to do with a broken plate. Caleb understood immediately. She wasn't seeing this kitchen, wasn't seeing him. She was somewhere else, expecting punishment for a simple accident. Lydia. He kept his voice soft, non-threatening, but she didn't seem to hear him. Lydia, it's all right. It's just a plate. I'm sorry, she repeated, already kneeling to pick up the pieces with shaking hands. I'll replace it, I promise. I didn't mean... Stop. He moved closer slowly, like approaching a spooked horse. You're going to cut yourself. Just stop. She froze, still kneeling, waiting for something. A blow, maybe. A punishment. When neither came, she looked up at him with such raw confusion that it broke something inside Caleb's chest. It's a plate, he said again, gentle. I don't care about the plate. I care that you're about to slice your hands open on broken crockery. Now stand up, step back, and let me handle this. She did, moving jerkily, like a puppet with tangled strings. Caleb swept up the pieces, dumped them in the trash, and turned back to find her standing rigid in the middle of the kitchen, arms wrapped around herself. Who was he? The question came out before Caleb could stop it. The man who did this to you, who made you think breaking a plate was worth apologizing for like your life depended on it. I can't, her voice cracked. Please don't ask me that. Was it your father, brother, husband? Stop. Because whoever he was, whatever he did, you need to understand something. I am nothing like him. You break every plate in this house. I won't lay a finger on you. You burn dinner, sleep till noon, track mud everywhere. I won't raise my voice. This is your home now, and you're allowed to make mistakes in it. Lydia's carefully controlled expression finally cracked. Tears spilled over and she turned away sharply, shoulders shaking with silent sobs she was trying desperately to hide. Caleb stood there, helpless, wanting to comfort her but knowing touch would only make it worse. So he did the only thing he could think of. He stepped back, giving her space. I'll be in the barn, he said quietly. Take your time. He walked out into the night, closing the door gently behind him, and leaned against the porch rail, breathing hard. The anger burning in his chest was new and fierce. He'd seen violence during the war, committed plenty himself in the name of survival. But this was different. This was cruelty for its own sake, power wielded against someone who couldn't fight back. And whoever had wielded it was out there somewhere, maybe still looking for her. Caleb made a decision then, standing alone under the stars. Tomorrow, he'd start teaching Lydia to defend herself. Not just with a rifle, though that too, but really defend herself. How to fight, how to run, how to survive. Because if trouble came, and his gut told him it would, she needed to be ready. The frontier was hard enough without carrying fear around like a second shadow. It was time Lydia learned she didn't have to. 3 days passed in careful routine. Lydia cooked, cleaned, kept the house in order. Caleb worked the ranch, came in for meals, slept in the barn. They spoke little, moved around each other like strangers sharing space, which they were. But small things changed. Lydia ate more, slept better, lost some of that terrible tenseness. The ranch's isolation seemed to ease her. No unexpected visitors, no loud noises except wind and cattle. Safe, predictable. Caleb caught her smiling once, just slightly, when she was hanging laundry and didn't know he was watching. On the fourth morning, he found her in the kitchen and said, "Today, I'm going to teach you to shoot." She looked up from kneading bread, flour dusting her hands. "Is that necessary?" "Out here? Yes. Wolves, mostly. Sometimes mountain lions. And you need to know how to defend yourself if I'm not around." Something in his tone must have told her he meant more than wild animals. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right." They spent the afternoon with his old Winchester, setting up tin cans on the fence rail. Lydia had never held a gun before, flinched at the first few shots, but she was a quick learner. By sunset, she could hit 3 out of 5 cans at 20 yards. "Good," Caleb said, genuinely impressed. "You've got steady hands. That'll serve you well." "My father used to say I had a surgeon's hands." The words slipped out and she immediately looked like she regretted them. "He a doctor?" "No, a banker, but he appreciated precision." She set the rifle down carefully. "That's enough for today. I should start dinner." But Caleb wasn't ready to let it go. "Lydia, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I need to know what kind of danger you're in, because if someone comes looking for you—" "No one's coming." She said it too fast, too certain. "I made sure of it." "How?" She turned away, heading back toward the house. "I told everyone I was dead." Caleb caught up to her at the porch. "What do you mean dead?" Lydia stopped, hand on the door, and for a long moment didn't speak. Then, "There was a fire at his estate 3 months ago. Several people died. I made sure my body was counted among them." Jesus, Caleb tried to process that. Whose body was it really? A housemaid, similar build, similar age. She died in the fire. I took her place in the records. Made sure the identification was confused enough that no one questioned it. Lydia's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I'm not proud of it, but it was the only way to make him stop looking." Him being? She finally turned to look at him, and in her eyes was something fierce and broken. Jonathan Ashford, of the Boston Ashfords. Shipping, railroads, real estate, one of the richest men in New England, and the man I was engaged to marry. The pieces clicked into place, the fine clothes, the educated speech, the terror of discovery. "He's the one who hurt you." "For 2 years, ever since my father arranged our engagement. At first it was small things, controlling what I wore, who I spoke to, where I went. Then it got worse. Worse. By the end..." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing more bruises. These ones faded to yellow-green. "By the end, I knew if I married him, I'd be dead within a year. So I chose to die on my own terms instead." Caleb felt cold fury settling into his bones. "If you're legally dead, you can't get married. Our marriage license is under a false name. Margaret Thompson, from Philadelphia. The woman who supposedly died in that fire. Her name, her identity, I took all of it." Lydia's voice shook slightly. "So technically, yes, our marriage is fraud. If you want to—" "I don't," he cut her off firmly. "I don't care about legal technicalities, but I do care that a man like that might not accept you're dead as easily as you think. Men like that, powerful, controlling, they don't let go. Ever think he might have suspected? Might be looking anyway? Every single day." The admission came out as a whisper. "Every time I hear a horse, every time someone knocks on a door, I think it's him, or his men, coming to drag me back. That's why you flinch, why you apologize for everything, why you can't sleep." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know it's foolish. I know I'm safe here, that I did everything right, covered all my tracks. But the fear doesn't care about logic." Caleb stepped closer, careful to stay at arm's length. "Then we make you able to fight it. Not just the fear, the real thing, if it comes. Tomorrow, I'm going to teach you more than shooting. I'm going to teach you how to survive. Caleb, you don't understand who you're talking about. Jonathan has resources, connections, private investigators, and I have land, guns, and 4 years of experience killing men who thought they were untouchable. His voice was hard now, edged with something dark. If he comes, Lydia, he won't be the first powerful man I've put in the ground. Won't be the last, either. She stared at him, searching his face for something. Why would you do this? Risk this? You don't even know me. Maybe not, but I know enough. He gestured toward her hidden bruises. I know what kind of man leaves marks like that. And I know what kind of woman survives it, escapes it, fakes her own death to get free. That's not weakness, Lydia. That's steel. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lydia Mercer smiled. Not much, barely a curve at the corner of her mouth, but real. You're either very brave or very foolish, Caleb Ward. Probably both. He returned the smile. Now go make dinner. I'll clean the rifles. She went inside and Caleb stood alone on the porch, watching the sun set over his land. Somewhere in Boston, a rich man thought his prey was dead and buried. Somewhere in that same city, maybe, someone suspected otherwise. And if they came looking, they'd find more than a frightened woman hiding at the edge of the world. They'd find a war they couldn't win. Caleb just hoped he was ready when it started. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. Mornings, Caleb taught Lydia to shoot. First the rifle, then his revolver until she could load, aim, and fire without hesitation. Afternoons, harder lessons. How to fight dirty, where to strike to disable a man, how to use fear and surprise as weapons when strength wasn't enough. You're smaller, he told her during one session, showing her how to gouge eyes, strike throats, use her opponent's weight against them. So you fight mean, no rules, no mercy. Survival doesn't care about fairness. Lydia proved an apt student. She had that same precision she'd mentioned, surgeon's hands, banker's daughter's discipline. Within a week, she could put a knife where she wanted it, could drop Caleb to his knees with a well-placed strike, though he was pulling his punches, teaching not actually fighting. But more than the physical skills, Caleb watched her confidence grow. The way she walked changed, straightened. The constant apologies stopped. She still flinched at sudden movements, still had nightmares that left her pale and shaking at breakfast, but slowly, she was becoming someone new. Or maybe becoming who she'd been before Jonathan Ashford broke her. 2 weeks after Lydia's arrival, Caleb had to go into town for supplies. He invited her along, thinking it might do her good to see other people, start building a normal life. She agreed, though he could see the anxiety in the way her hands twisted together during the wagon ride. Medicine Bow hadn't changed. Same dusty street, same weathered buildings, same faces peering from windows. But the reaction to Lydia was immediate and intense. Women came out of the general store to meet her, voices bright with curiosity. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Holloway, the schoolteacher, Miss Sarah Chen, the doctor's daughter, Ruth. Mrs. Ward, we've been dying to meet you. Caleb's been keeping you all to himself. You must come to the church social next month. Lydia handled it with practiced grace, smiling and nodding and saying all the right things. But Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she positioned herself so her back was never to open space. While the women chatted, Caleb headed into the general store. Tom Brennan, the owner, greeted him with a knowing grin. So that's the famous bride, huh? Awful pretty for a mail-order wife, Ward. You rob a bank to afford her? Just lucky, I guess. Caleb started loading supplies, flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition. She's settling in fine. That's so? Brennan's tone carried something Caleb didn't like. Funny thing, though. Had a stranger through here a couple days ago, asking questions. Caleb's hand stilled on a bag of beans. What kind of stranger? City type. Well-dressed, polite. Said he was a private investigator from Boston, looking for a missing woman. Showed me a photograph, too. Ice flooded Caleb's veins. And? Didn't recognize her from the picture. Photo was pretty generic, dark hair, pale, nothing distinctive. Could have been half the women in Wyoming. Brennan paused. But I did mention we just got a new mail-order bride in town. Figured it wasn't the same person, but he seemed real interested, asked where you lived. You tell him? Course not. Told him to mind his own business. Brennan leaned closer, voice dropping. But Ward, between you and me, your wife in some kind of trouble? Because this fellow, he had that look. You know the one. Dangerous under the polish. Caleb paid for his supplies quickly, mind racing. If anyone else comes asking, you didn't see her. You don't know anything. Understand? Already handled. But Caleb, whatever this is, be careful. Men like that don't ask questions for their health. Outside, Lydia was still surrounded by women, but Caleb could see the strain showing. He caught her eye, gave a slight nod toward the wagon. She made her excuses gracefully, and they loaded up in silence. They were a mile out of town before Caleb spoke. We've got a problem. The color drained from Lydia's face. What kind of problem? He told her about the investigator, watching her hands begin to shake. No, she whispered. No, it's not possible. I was so careful. The fire, the body, the records. Maybe he's just being thorough, checking every possibility. Caleb tried to keep his voice calm, reassuring. Maybe the photo didn't match, and he'll move on. Or maybe Jonathan knew all along I wasn't dead. Maybe he was just waiting, watching, to see where I'd surface. Lydia's breathing was coming faster now, panic setting in. I have to run, tonight, before he comes, before… No. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her fully. Listen to me. Running puts you alone, exposed. Here, you've got me, defensible ground, and people who've already accepted you as my wife. That's an advantage. You don't know him, don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me. He kept his voice steady, firm. Tell me everything, because I can't protect you if I don't know what we're facing. So she did. It poured out of her in a rush, 2 years of carefully documented horror. How Jonathan had courted her father, not her, securing the engagement through business deals and financial pressure. How he'd isolated her from friends, family, anyone who might interfere. The first time he'd hit her, she'd tried to leave, and he'd had her father's banknote called in, threatened to destroy her family financially unless she complied. He told me I was his, Lydia said, voice hollow, that I'd always be his, that if I ever tried to leave, he'd make me disappear so completely no one would ever find me. And I believed him because I'd seen him do it before, to a housemaid who got pregnant, to a business rival who crossed him. He has this smile when he's angry, this calm, cold smile, and then… She stopped, couldn't continue, didn't need to. Caleb understood. How many people know you're alive? He asked. Really alive? No one. Maybe Sarah, the maid whose identity I took, but she's dead. The man who made the false documents was killed 2 weeks later in what looked like a robbery. I made sure there were no loose ends. Except one. Caleb's jaw tightened. You. You're the loose end, because men like Jonathan Ashford don't believe in coincidence. Dead fiancé, mysterious fire, body that can't be fully identified. He knew. Maybe not right away, but eventually he figured it out. Lydia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Then I've brought this to your door. I've put you in danger for nothing, because he'll find me anyway. He always… Stop! Caleb reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand. She flinched but didn't pull away. You listen to me now. This Jonathan Ashford, he's used to getting what he wants because no one stands against him, because money and power make people afraid. But he's never faced someone like me, someone who doesn't give a damn about his wealth or his name or his threats, someone who's killed before and won't hesitate to do it again. Caleb, I'm not done. You came here for safety, and that's what you're going to get, but we're not running, and we're not hiding. If he comes, we face him, together. And we make damn sure he understands that you're not his anymore. You're mine, not as property, but as family, as someone under my protection, and I protect what's mine. Lydia stared at him, tears still falling, but something else in her eyes now. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of belief. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for a stranger? Caleb considered the question, really thought about it. Because I know what it's like to feel powerless, to have someone stronger, meaner, with more authority, make you feel like nothing. And I swore after the war I'd never stand by and watch it happen to someone else. Not if I could do something about it. He released her hand, picked up the reins. So here's what's going to happen. We go home, we prepare, I'm going to ride to the neighbors, let them know there might be trouble, get some backup in place. You're going to practice those shooting lessons until you can hit a target in the dark. And if this investigator, or Ashford himself, shows up, we're going to be ready. And if we're not, if he brings men, guns, legal documents, then we adapt. But Lydia, you need to understand something. This is Wyoming territory, not Boston. Out here, the law is whatever you can defend. A piece of paper means nothing if the man holding it can't enforce it, and I promise you, he won't get the chance. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped her down, then started unloading supplies with sharp, angry movements. Not anger at her, anger at the situation, at the man who'd driven her to this, at a world that let monsters wear expensive suits and get away with it. Caleb? Lydia's voice stopped him. She was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the late afternoon light. Thank you for believing me, for not sending me away. Where else would you go? He meant it as reassurance, but it came out harsher than intended. Anywhere. Everywhere. Just alone. She smiled sadly. I've been alone for a long time, even when I was surrounded by people. It's strange, having someone on my side. Better get used to it. He carried the last of the supplies inside. Because I'm stubborn as hell, and I don't quit easy. That night, Lydia stayed up late cleaning and checking the rifles. Caleb worked on the ranch's defensive positions, noting sight lines, potential approaches, where to position shooters if it came to that. When he finally came inside for a late dinner, he found her at the table, the revolver disassembled in front of her, cleaning each piece with meticulous care. Can't sleep? He asked. Don't want to. Every time I close my eyes, I see him, hear his voice. She reassembled the gun with quick, practiced movements. He'd taught her well. Better to stay busy. Caleb sat across from her, bone-tired but too wired to rest. He's got a face, this Jonathan Ashford. Anything distinctive? So I'll know him if I see him. Handsome. Everyone says so. Dark hair, always perfectly styled, expensive clothes. But his eyes are what you'll notice. Pale blue, like ice. And when he's angry, they go completely flat, like a shark's. Height, build? Tall, maybe an inch taller than you, slender but stronger than he looks. Fencer's build? Lydia paused. He'll have guards with him. He never travels without at least 2, sometimes more. Professional men, not common thugs. Military? Some of them. Others are just loyal. He pays well, and he rewards brutality. She finished with the gun, set it aside. I saw him order a man beaten nearly to death once for spilling wine on his coat, watched the whole thing with that smile, then had the man's family evicted from their home the next day. Caleb felt his jaw clench. Monster. Yes, but a smart one. He'll have legal documents, probably a court order declaring me incompetent or claiming I'm mentally ill. He'll make it look legitimate, official. That's how he operates. Everything appears lawful, proper, until you're trapped. Let him bring his papers. Out here, they're just kindling. Caleb stood, moved to the window. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars scattered across black sky. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to some people. The sheriff, for what he's worth. A couple of the neighboring ranchers. If trouble's coming, we'll meet it with numbers. You'd risk your neighbors? Your friends? They're frontier people, Lydia. They know sometimes the law doesn't reach far enough, fast enough, and they know how to shoot. He turned back to her. Besides, half of them came out here running from something too. They'll understand. Lydia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're not what I expected, Caleb Ward. What did you expect? Someone hard, cold, looking for cheap labor and someone to warm his bed. A transaction, nothing more. She stood, moved to put the gun away in its place above the door. Instead, I got someone who treats breaking plates like it's normal, who teaches me to fight instead of expecting me to be helpless. Who's willing to stand against one of the most powerful men in America to protect a woman he barely knows? Maybe I'm just contrary. Always did hate bullies. Maybe. Or maybe you're just a good man. She paused at the door to her room. Either way, I'm grateful. More than I can say. After she'd gone to bed, or at least to her room, since sleeping was another matter, Caleb sat alone in the dark, thinking. He'd meant what he said about protecting her, but he also knew the reality of what they were facing. A rich, powerful man with unlimited resources versus a rancher barely scraping by? On paper, it was no contest. But paper didn't account for determination, for rage, for the kind of fierce, burning need to do the right thing that had driven Caleb through 4 years of war. If Jonathan Ashford came for Lydia, he'd find more than a frightened woman hiding at the edge of civilization. He'd find a reckoning. Caleb checked the rifle one more time, made sure the ammunition was within easy reach, and settled in for a long night of watching, because somewhere out there, trouble was coming. He just didn't know how soon. Dawn broke cold and sharp 3 days later, and Caleb was already saddling his horse when Lydia emerged from the house. She'd learned to move quieter now, less like someone apologizing for existing and more like someone who belonged. But this morning, something was different. She carried the rifle he'd given her, and her jaw was set in that way that meant she'd made a decision. "I'm coming with you," she said. Caleb tightened the cinch, didn't look up. "Town's not safe for you right now. Better you stay here. Keep watch. You're writing to the neighbors to ask for help defending me. I should be there. They should see who they're protecting, hear the story from me, not secondhand." He turned then, studied her face. She'd pulled her hair back practical instead of painful, wore one of the simpler dresses he'd bought her from the catalog, sturdy cotton instead of fine wool. Ready for work, not show. "You sure about that? Once you tell people, there's no taking it back." "I'm tired of hiding." Her voice was steady, stronger than he'd heard before. "If Jonathan's investigator is already asking questions, then people will talk anyway. Better they hear the truth from me than make up their own stories." Caleb considered, then nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. Start with the Hendersons. They're good people, been out here long enough to understand complications. Then the Chens if it goes well." They rode out together, Lydia handling her mare with growing confidence. The Henderson Ranch sat 8 miles east, a sprawling operation that made Caleb's place look like a homestead. Robert Henderson had fought for the Confederacy but held no grudges, believed in frontier law over old loyalties. His wife Margaret ran the household with the same efficiency her husband ran cattle. The Hendersons were in the yard when they arrived, Robert mending fence, while Margaret hung laundry. Both stopped at the sight of Lydia. News of the mail-order bride had spread, but few had actually met her yet. "Caleb Ward," Robert called out, wiping his hands. "And this must be the missus. Heard you'd found yourself a wife." "Mrs. Ward, this is Robert and Margaret Henderson. Good neighbors, good people." Caleb helped Lydia down. "We need to talk inside if you've got time." Margaret's shrewd eyes moved between them, taking in Lydia's careful posture. The rifle Caleb carried inside instead of leaving on his saddle. "Coffee's hot. Come on in." The Henderson house was bigger, more established than Caleb's cabin. They settled around a worn kitchen table, and Margaret poured coffee while Robert waited with the patient silence of a man who'd learned when to listen. Caleb started the story, but Lydia interrupted. "No, I need to tell it." So she did. Not everything. She spared them the worst details. But enough. The engagement arranged by her father, Jonathan Ashford's escalating control and violence. The impossible choice between a slow death in marriage or a dangerous escape. The fire, the faked death, the long journey west under a false name. "And now his investigator is here," she finished, hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Asking questions in Medicine Bow. If he finds me, Jonathan will come, and he won't come alone." Robert had gone very still during the telling, his weathered face unreadable. Margaret reached across the table and took Lydia's hand. A simple gesture, but it made Lydia's eyes shine with sudden tears. "This Ashford," Robert said finally, "he's the type who thinks money makes him above the law? He doesn't think it. He knows it. He owns judges, police, politicians. In Boston, he is the law." "Well," Robert leaned back, exchanged a look with his wife. "Good thing we're not in Boston." Margaret squeezed Lydia's hand. "You did right coming here. Frontier's got no patience for men who hurt women. We take care of our own out here, and you're one of ours now." "You understand what you're saying?" Caleb asked quietly. "This man has resources. If he comes, it won't be pretty." "Let him come." Robert's voice was hard. We didn't survive the war, hostile territory, 3 hard winters, and a drought that killed half our herd just to let some eastern dandy walk onto our land and take what he wants. He shows up here making threats. He'll learn real quick that Wyoming ain't Boston." The relief on Lydia's face was almost painful to watch. "Thank you. I don't know how to—" "Don't thank us yet," Margaret interrupted, but her tone was kind. "We help our neighbors, but this kind of help needs preparation. Robert, you thinking what I'm thinking? Town meeting. Get everyone together, lay out the situation." Robert nodded slowly. "Frontier justice requires frontier agreement. We do this, we do it right." Caleb felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying start to ease. "When?" "Tonight. I'll send word. Everyone gathers at the church by sundown." Robert stood, already moving into action mode. "Meantime, you two should talk to the Chens, the Pollards, the Mackenzies. More people who hear it straight from Mrs. Ward, better our case." They spent the day riding from ranch to ranch, and the response was the same everywhere. Shock at first, then anger, then that hard frontier solidarity that came from people who understood survival required standing together. By late afternoon, they'd talked to 7 families, and word was spreading on its own. "They believe you," Caleb said as they rode toward town. "Every single one." Lydia looked stunned, overwhelmed. "I thought they'd judge me. Think I was exaggerating, or that I somehow deserved a—" "These are people who know what real hardship looks like. They recognize truth when they hear it." He glanced at her. "How you holding up?" "I don't know. Terrified, relieved, like I might actually have a chance." She took a shaky breath. I keep waiting for someone to call me a liar, to demand proof." "The proof's on your skin, in your eyes, in the way you still flinch sometimes when I move too fast." Caleb's voice was gentle. "You can't fake that kind of fear, Lydia, and they know it." They reached town as the sun was setting. The church, a simple wooden building that doubled as a schoolhouse and meeting hall, was already filling with people. Ranchers, their wives, townspeople, even a few of the Chinese railroad workers who'd stayed after the tracks went through. Medicine Bow's entire population, maybe 80 people total, crammed into a space meant for 40. Sheriff Tucker was there too, leaning against the back wall. He was a fat, lazy man who mostly handled drunk cowboys and property disputes, but tonight his expression was serious. Robert Henderson stood at the front, waiting for quiet. When the murmur of voices died down, he spoke clearly. "Most of you know why we're here. For those who don't, let me be plain. Caleb Ward's wife is in danger from a powerful man back east. This man has already sent an investigator to our town asking questions. We need to decide, as a community, how we're going to handle it." "What kind of danger?" someone called out. Robert looked at Lydia, gave her a small nod. She stood slowly, and Caleb could see her hands shaking. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "My name is Lydia Mercer. I came here as Caleb's mail-order bride under a false identity because I faked my death to escape a man named Jonathan Ashford." She paused, let that sink in. "For 2 years he abused me, beat me, controlled every aspect of my life. When I tried to leave, he threatened to destroy my family financially, so I waited, planned. And when a fire broke out at his estate, I saw my chance. I took the identity of a woman who died in that fire, left Boston, and came here to start over." The room was absolutely silent. "I thought I'd been careful enough. Thought I'd covered my tracks. But now his investigator is here, asking questions, showing photographs. If he finds me, Jonathan will come. And when he does," Lydia's voice cracked slightly, "when he does, he'll try to take me back. By force if necessary. He'll have legal documents, guards, money to make problems disappear." "Why should we believe you?" The question came from Dale Pritchard, a sour man who'd opposed nearly every community decision for the past 5 years. "Could be you're just a criminal running from the law. Could be this Ashford fellow's the victim here." Lydia didn't flinch. Instead, she did something Caleb hadn't expected. She unbuttoned her left sleeve and pushed it up, revealing the full extent of the bruising on her arm. Not just the wrist, but up to her elbow, a roadmap of violence in purple and yellow. "Does this look like I'm the criminal, Mr. Pritchard?" Her voice was cold now, hard. "Would you like to see the ones on my back? My ribs? The scar on my shoulder where he burned me with a cigar for speaking to another man at a party? The women in the room gasped. Margaret Henderson stood up, face flushed with anger. I've seen those marks up close, examined them myself this morning. No woman does that to herself. No lawman leaves evidence like that. I've seen worse on slaves before the war, added Samuel Chen, the oldest man in town. That's the mark of ownership, of someone who thinks another person is property. Dale started to argue, but his own wife cut him off. Sit down, Dale. For once in your life, just sit down and listen. He sat. Sheriff Tucker pushed off from the wall, moved to the front. Legal standpoint, we got complications. If Mrs. Ward here is using a false identity, technically that's fraud. Her marriage to Caleb might not be valid. And if this Ashford shows up with court documents, then the court can go to hell, Robert Henderson interrupted. We're talking about a man's right to abuse his property versus a woman's right to survive. I know which side I'm on. Me too, called out someone from the back. And me. Here too. Voices rose, overlapping, a wave of agreement that filled the small church. Caleb watched in amazement as the community that had mostly ignored him for 2 years suddenly rallied around his wife, a stranger they'd just met. But not everyone agreed. This is madness. Dale was on his feet again. You're talking about defying the law, about harboring a fugitive. When the federal marshals get involved, let them come, Margaret said coldly. Let them see what we've seen. Let them hear what we've heard. And let them try to tell us frontier justice doesn't matter anymore. Mrs. Henderson's right. This from Ruth, the doctor's daughter. I've treated enough domestic cases to know them when I see them. Mrs. Ward's telling the truth. Then something happened that changed everything. A woman Caleb barely knew, Annie Pollard, a shy rancher's wife who rarely spoke in public, stood up slowly. I need to say something. Her voice shook, but she pushed on. 6 years ago, I was married to a man in Kansas. Respectable man, everyone said, pillar of the community, and he beat me nearly every night for 3 years. The room went quiet again, but different this time, listening. I tried to leave twice. Both times he found me, dragged me back. The law didn't help. He was friends with the sheriff. The church didn't help. The preacher said wives should submit. So I waited until he passed out drunk one night, took his horse, and rode for 2 days straight. Annie's eyes were wet but fierce. I came here, started over, married a good man who doesn't raise his hand to me. And if anyone tried to take me back to Kansas, my husband would kill them, and I'd help. She sat down, and her husband, quiet Thomas Pollard, put his arm around her shoulders. Then another woman stood. My sister had a husband like that. He killed her, said she fell down the stairs, and everyone believed him because he was charming, and she was just some woman with a clumsy reputation. Another. My mother. My father put her in the ground when I was 12, called it an accident. Another. I ran from a man in Denver, made it here just in time. One by one, women rose and spoke, shared stories they'd buried for years. And the men listened, really listened, many of them hearing for the first time what their neighbors, their wives, their daughters had endured. By the time the last woman sat down, there was no question about where Medicine Bow stood. Sheriff Tucker cleared his throat. All right, here's what I can do legally, which ain't much. If this Ashford shows up with federal documents, I'm supposed to enforce them. That's the law. He paused. But if there's reason to believe those documents are fraudulent, or if there's evidence of ongoing criminal activity, or if I have genuine concern for Mrs. Ward's safety, well, then I got grounds to delay, question, investigate. How long can you delay? Caleb asked. Long enough for you to get her to the territorial judge in Laramie, maybe. Get her side heard in a real court, not whatever bought and paid for arrangement Ashford might bring. Tucker looked at Lydia. You willing to testify? Tell a judge everything you told us? Yes. No hesitation. Then we got a plan. This investigator shows up again. I'll stall him. Tell him I need to verify Mrs. Ward's identity, check marriage records, whatever bureaucratic nonsense buys time. Meanwhile, Robert, you and the other ranchers stay ready. If this goes bad, it won't go alone, Robert finished. We stand together. The meeting broke up slowly, people coming forward to speak to Lydia, offer support, share their own stories in quieter voices. By the time they left, Lydia looked exhausted, but something else too. Lighter. Like she'd been carrying a weight she could finally set down. They rode home in darkness, the stars bright enough to see by. Caleb stayed alert, eyes scanning the horizon, but Lydia seemed almost peaceful. "I've never felt anything like that," she said quietly. "All those people standing up, standing with me. In Boston, no one would have believed it, or if they did, they wouldn't have cared. Different world out here, has to be, or none of us would survive. Still, it's more than I hoped for." She was quiet for a moment. "Caleb, what happens if Jonathan comes anyway? If all this preparation isn't enough? Then we fight, and we don't stop fighting until you're safe." He said it simply, as fact. "But Lydia, you need to understand, if it comes to that, if he actually shows up with men and guns, there's going to be blood. Maybe a lot of it. You ready for that?" "I think so. I've been ready for violence for 2 years. I just wasn't the one delivering it before." They reached the ranch to find everything quiet, undisturbed. Caleb did a full check anyway, barn, outbuildings, perimeter, while Lydia went inside. When he joined her, she'd made coffee and was sitting at the table with that same fierce look she'd worn at the meeting. "Teach me more," she said. "Not just shooting, everything. How to track someone, how to hide, how to survive if I'm on the run again. I don't want to be helpless anymore." So he did. Over the next week, Caleb taught Lydia everything he knew. How to read signs in dirt and grass, know if someone had passed, how to move quietly, use terrain for cover, how to start a fire without smoke, find water, navigate by stars. All the skills that had kept him alive during the war and after. She absorbed it like she was starving for it, this knowledge that meant agency, control, survival. And Caleb watched her transform day by day into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. But underneath, the fear remained. Every distant rider made her tense. Every unexpected sound brought that flat, hunted look back to her eyes. On the 8th day, the investigator came to the ranch. Caleb saw him from a distance, a single rider, well-dressed, moving with the careful confidence of someone used to city streets, not open country. He rode directly toward the house, no attempt at stealth. "Lydia," Caleb called. "Inside, now." She appeared at the door, saw the rider, and went pale. But she didn't run. Instead, she picked up the rifle, checked the load, and positioned herself at the window. Caleb met the man in the yard, hand resting casually on his revolver. Up close, the investigator looked exactly like what he was. Expensive suit, polished boots, that smooth, practiced smile that meant nothing. "Good afternoon," the man said, staying on his horse. Smart. "My name is Detective Marcus Whitmore from Boston. I'm looking for someone, and I believe you might be able to help." "Doubt it. Don't know many people from Boston." "The woman I'm seeking is named Lydia Mercer. Dark hair, pale complexion, gray eyes. About 25 years old." Whitmore pulled out a photograph, held it up. "Have you seen anyone matching this description?" The photograph was old, showed Lydia in an elaborate dress, hairstyled, smiling. She looked nothing like that now. "Nope." Caleb's voice was flat. "Now get off my land." "Mr. Ward. It is Ward, isn't it? Caleb Ward?" Whitmore's smile widened. "I understand you recently acquired a mail-order bride. From Boston, I'm told. Quite a coincidence." "Coincidences happen. My wife's from Philadelphia, not Boston. And her name's Margaret Thompson. Now, I'm not going to ask again. Leave." "I'd very much like to speak with Mrs. Ward. Just a few questions, verify her identity. Surely she wouldn't mind." "She would, and I do." Caleb's hand moved to his gun, not drawing, just making his position clear. "You're trespassing. You've got 10 seconds to turn that horse around, or I'll assume you're here to cause trouble." For a moment, Whitmore's pleasant mask slipped, showing something cold underneath. "Mr. Ashford is a very powerful man, Mr. Ward. Very influential. He has resources you can't imagine. If you're harboring the woman he's looking for, you're making a terrible mistake." "That a threat?" "A warning. Professional courtesy. One reasonable man to another." Whitmore gathered his reins. "I'll be in Medicine Bow for a few more days, asking questions, checking records. If you're lying to me, I'll know. And when Mr. Ashford arrives, not if, when, he won't be as polite as I am. He rode off slowly, deliberately, making it clear he wasn't intimidated. Caleb watched until he disappeared over the rise, then turned to find Lydia in the doorway, rifle still in her hands, face bloodless. "He knows," she whispered. "He doesn't have proof yet, but he knows." "Let him know. Knowing and proving are different things." Caleb took the rifle from her gently, saw her hands shaking. "You did good. Stayed calm, stayed ready." "I wanted to shoot him. Is that terrible? I saw him and I thought, I could end this right now, one bullet. That's not terrible. That's survival instinct. But you didn't shoot, and that's what matters." He guided her inside, sat her down. "Whitmore's going to go back to town, stir up trouble. We need to move fast. I'm writing to Laramie tomorrow, talking to the territorial judge, getting ahead of whatever legal mess Ashford might bring." "I should come." "No, you're safer here with the rifle and the high ground. Robert's sending over his oldest son to help keep watch. You'll be protected." Lydia grabbed his arm. "Caleb, what if he doesn't wait? What if Ashford's already on his way? Then we deal with it, but I'm betting he's not. Men like that, they move slow. Make sure everything's perfect, all the pieces in place. Whitmore's the scout, checking the ground. Ashford won't come until he's certain, and we're going to make sure he's never certain." But even as Caleb said it, he felt the noose tightening. Whitmore was good at his job, that was clear. And if he started really digging, asking the right questions, checking records, how long before he confirmed what he already suspected? How long before Jonathan Ashford, with all his money and power and rage, descended on Medicine Bow? And when he did, would frontier justice and a handful of ranchers really be enough to stop him? Caleb didn't know. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd die before he let that monster take Lydia back. The question was whether dying would be enough. That night, neither of them slept. Caleb sat at the window, rifle across his lap, watching the horizon. Lydia paced, checked weapons, tried to read but couldn't focus. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Around midnight, she finally spoke. "Tell me about the war, about how you survived." Caleb didn't want to. Those memories were locked away for good reasons, but he understood what she was really asking. How do you face overwhelming odds and not break? "Survival's mostly about accepting you might die," he said slowly. "Once you make peace with that, fear loses its power. You stop hesitating, stop second-guessing. You do what needs doing because the outcome doesn't matter as much as the trying." "Did you make peace with it? Dying?" "For a while. Then the war ended and I had to figure out how to live again. That was harder, honestly. Death's easy. Life takes work." Lydia sat down across from him, face shadowed in the lamplight. "I'm not afraid of dying anymore, Caleb. I was, for a long time. Every day with Jonathan felt like dying slowly. But now I'm more afraid of not living, of surviving this but staying afraid forever. You won't. Fear's not permanent unless you feed it. How do I stop feeding it?" "You already are. Every day you stay, every time you don't run, every moment you choose to fight instead of hide. That's you starving the fear. It'll get weaker. Eventually it'll be small enough you can live with it." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "If this goes bad, if somehow Jonathan wins, takes me back, I want you to promise me something. Promise me you won't blame yourself. Promise me you'll know I chose this. Chose to stand instead of run. That even if I lose, it was my choice, my fight. Can you do that?" Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd come to him broken and was slowly becoming steel, and felt something shift in his chest. Not romantic exactly. Deeper than that. Recognition of a kindred spirit. Someone who'd looked into darkness and chosen to strike a light anyway. "I promise," he lied. Because if Jonathan Ashford took Lydia, Caleb wouldn't accept it. Wouldn't move on. He'd hunt the bastard across the country if necessary, burn his empire to ash, make him pay in blood and screaming for every mark he'd left on her skin. But she didn't need to know that. Not now. Dawn came gray and cold, bringing with it a rider from town, young Billy Chen, Samuel's grandson, pushing his horse hard. "Sheriff wants you," Billy gasped out. "Says it's urgent. The investigator's asking for federal marshals, claiming you're harboring a fugitive." And there it was. The beginning of the end, or the beginning of the fight. Caleb looked at Lydia, saw her square her shoulders, lift her chin. Then we'd better go talk to the sheriff, she said. Together. They rode into Medicine Bow with the morning sun climbing behind them, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Caleb kept his hand near his revolver, eyes scanning every window, every alley, every face. Lydia sat straight in her saddle, chin up, but he could see the white-knuckle grip she had on her reins. The town felt different, tense. People stood in small clusters, talking in low voices that stopped when Caleb and Lydia passed. But there was no hostility in those watching faces, just anticipation, like everyone knew a storm was coming and they were waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Sheriff Tucker's office sat between the general store and the saloon, a squat building with iron bars on the windows. Tucker himself stood outside, thumbs hooked in his belt, his usual lazy demeanor replaced by something sharper. "Ward, Mrs. Ward," he nodded to them. "Best come inside." The office was cramped, a desk buried in papers, a gun rack on the wall, 2 cells in the back that had never held anyone more dangerous than drunk cowboys. Detective Whitmore stood by the window, looking out at the street with that same cold smile he'd worn at the ranch. "Mr. Ward, how good of you to come." Whitmore turned, and his gaze slid to Lydia. "And you must be Mrs. Ward, or should I say, Miss Mercer?" Lydia didn't flinch. "My name is Lydia Ward, legally married to Caleb Ward 3 weeks ago, as the county records will show. Under the name Margaret Thompson, yes, I've seen those records." Whitmore pulled out a folder, laid it on Tucker's desk. "I've also seen records from Boston. A death certificate for one Lydia Mercer, deceased in a fire 3 months ago. Dental records that don't quite match the body found. Witness statements that suddenly changed after substantial payments were made. And most interesting of all, a housemaid named Margaret Thompson, who died in that same fire. The same name Mrs. Ward here used to get married." The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Tucker shifted his weight. "That's a compelling story, Detective. But it's also a lot of speculation based on circumstantial evidence. You got anything concrete? Fingerprints? Witnesses who can positively identify Mrs. Ward as this Lydia Mercer?" "I have Mr. Ashford arriving in 3 days with documents from a Boston court declaring Lydia Mercer mentally incompetent and granting him legal guardianship. I have photographs. I have sworn testimony from servants, business associates, family friends." Whitmore's voice was smooth, confident. "And I have eyes, Sheriff. Look at her. That's Lydia Mercer, and we both know it." "What I know," Tucker said slowly, "is that you're asking me to turn over a woman to a man who allegedly abused her, based on documents I haven't seen from a court that has no jurisdiction in Wyoming territory. The documents give him jurisdiction everywhere, federal jurisdiction. We'll see about that when they arrive. Until then, Mrs. Ward is a citizen of Medicine Bow, legally married with no outstanding warrants or charges. She stays." Whitmore's pleasant mask slipped further. "Sheriff, I strongly advise against obstructing this investigation. Mr. Ashford has friends in very high places. The territorial governor, senators, even the president has attended his dinner parties. When he arrives and finds you've been sheltering his missing fiancé—" "Former fiancé," Lydia interrupted, her voice like ice. "I was never his anything except his victim." "That's a serious accusation, Miss Mercer." Whitmore turned to her fully now. "Mr. Ashford is devastated by your disappearance. He spent a fortune searching for you, worried sick that something terrible had happened. And now I find you've been hiding out here, playing house with some frontier rancher, spreading lies about a man who only ever wanted to care for you." "Care for me?" Lydia's laugh was bitter, broken. "Is that what you call breaking my ribs? Burning my skin with cigars? Choking me until I passed out because I smiled at a waiter? Those are terrible allegations. Do you have proof? I have scars. I have medical records from doctors in Boston who treated my injuries. I have testimony from servants who witnessed, servants who've since recanted those statements, claiming you pressured them. Doctors who admitted you were often clumsy, accident-prone." Whitmore shook his head. "Miss Mercer, I understand you've been through trauma. The fire must have been horrific, but running away, assuming a false identity, making these accusations, this isn't rational behavior. Mr. Ashford only wants to help you recover. Caleb had heard enough. Recover in his custody, where he can finish what he started. That about right? Mr. Ward, I'd advise you to stay out of this. Harboring a fugitive, interfering with a federal investigation, these are serious crimes. Show me the federal warrant. Caleb's voice was flat, dangerous. Show me the papers that say you have any authority here beyond running your mouth. Whitmore's hand moved toward his coat. Caleb's hand moved to his gun, faster. The detective froze. Easy now, Tucker said, stepping between them. Nobody's drawing weapons in my office. Detective, you got official papers to serve. You give them to me and I'll review them proper. You got questions to ask, you ask them polite. But you start making threats, throwing weight around, and I'll remember that when those federal documents arrive. If they arrive, Lydia said quietly, because Jonathan doesn't have federal authority. He has bought judges and forged documents. The only thing real about his power is the fear. You sound very certain of that. I am, because I've seen how he operates. He'll arrive with papers that look official, men who look like lawmen, and money to make problems disappear. But it's all theater, all illusion, and the moment someone calls his bluff, it falls apart. Whitmore studied her, and for the first time, something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. You've changed, Miss Mercer. You used to be so quiet, so compliant. What happened to that frightened girl? She died in the fire. I'm what's left. The detective was quiet for a long moment, then carefully took his hand away from his coat. 3 days, Sheriff. Mr. Ashford arrives in 3 days with everything he needs to take custody of Miss Mercer. I'd advise you to have her ready to transfer or things will get very complicated. Complicated's my specialty. Tucker opened the door, gestured toward it. Now, unless you got official business, I need to ask you to leave. Got actual work to do. Whitmore left, but his parting look at Lydia was full of cold promise. The moment he was gone, Tucker closed the door and leaned against it. Well, that was about as pleasant as a rattlesnake in your bedroll. He looked at Lydia. Mrs. Ward, I meant what I said. You're a citizen here, and I protect my citizens. But I need you to understand what we're facing. If Ashford really has federal documents, he won't. Not real ones. Lydia's voice was certain. Jonathan's power comes from buying local authority. Judges, police chiefs, politicians in Boston. But federal jurisdiction requires actual crimes, actual warrants. I haven't committed any. The worst he can claim is that I'm mentally incompetent, which requires a hearing, medical evaluation, witnesses. All of which he'll have fabricated, Caleb pointed out. Maybe. But it still requires a process. Time. And time is what we need. She turned to Tucker. Sheriff, if you can delay any transfer for even a few days, we can get to Laramie, file our own petition with the territorial court, get an independent judge to hear the case. Tucker scratched his jaw. That's a lot of faith in the system for someone who just said the system is bought and paid for. Not faith, strategy. Jonathan's power structure is centered in Boston. Out here, he's just another man with money. Money can buy a lot, but it can't buy everything. Not instantly, not in 3 days. She's right, Caleb said. We use the distance against him. Make him play on our ground instead of his. The door burst open. Robert Henderson strode in, face flushed. Tucker, we got a problem. Whitmore's over at the telegraph office right now, sending wires back east. If he's calling in federal marshals, let him. Lydia's voice was calm, controlled. Real federal marshals take weeks to authorize and dispatch. By the time they arrive, if they arrive, we'll have our own legal standing established. And if he's not calling real marshals, Robert asked, if he's calling Ashford's men, dressed up to look official? That stopped everyone. It was exactly the kind of thing Jonathan would do. Hire men, give them badges, forge the documentation. Who in Medicine Bow would know the difference between a real federal marshal and a convincing fake? Then we prepare for the worst, Caleb said. How many men can we count on if it comes to a fight? Robert considered. 20, maybe 25 if we include the older boys. Most of them fought in the war, one side or the other. They know how to handle themselves. Against how many? Tucker asked. If Ashford's as rich as you say, he could hire an army. He won't. Lydia shook her head. Too visible, too obvious. Jonathan operates in shadows, uses just enough force to accomplish his goals. He'll come with maybe 6 to 8 men, probably more. Enough to intimidate, not enough to draw territorial attention, and they'll look official. Badges, warrants, the whole show. So we let them show up, then what? Robert pressed. We can't just shoot men who claim to be federal marshals, even if they're frauds. We expose them, Lydia said. Force them to prove their authority. Real marshals have credentials, documentation, authorization from specific federal judges. Fakes don't. They'll have papers that look good at first glance, but fall apart under scrutiny. Tucker was nodding slowly. That could work, if we had someone who knew what real federal documents looked like. I do. Everyone turned to stare at Lydia. My father was a banker. Part of his work involved verifying federal bonds, treasury documents, legal papers. He taught me how to spot forgeries. I can recognize the real thing. Caleb felt a surge of hope. So we make them present their credentials, publicly, in front of the whole town. At another town meeting, Robert added, catching on. Force them to make their case in the open instead of behind closed doors. And when we prove the documents are fake, Tucker asked, then they're just criminals with guns, and you arrest them. Lydia's smile was sharp, fierce. Jonathan's whole strategy depends on the illusion of legitimacy. Break that illusion, and he has nothing. It was a good plan. Maybe even a brilliant plan. But Caleb could see the flaw. It assumed Jonathan Ashford would play by any rules at all. And men who burned their fiancées with cigars rarely cared about legitimacy when it got in their way. But it was all they had. Over the next 3 days, Medicine Bow transformed into something between a town and a fortress. Men cleaned weapons, checked ammunition, took positions at key vantage points. Women prepared supplies, medical kits, food stores. Everyone understood what was coming, even if they didn't say it aloud. War. That's what was coming. Maybe not shooting, not yet, but war nonetheless. Caleb spent most of that time preparing the ranch, setting up defensive positions, creating fallback routes if they needed to run. But every night, he came back to find Lydia doing the same thing, planning, preparing, getting ready to fight instead of flee. On the second night, she asked him something he hadn't expected. If this works, if we actually stop Jonathan and his men, what happens after? Caleb looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. What do you mean? I mean us, this marriage. It's not real, not legally. Once the threat is gone, you'll want your life back, your privacy. I'll need to find somewhere else. Stop! He set the rifle down. Lydia, I don't know what happens after, but I do know you're not going anywhere unless you want to. This might have started as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became real. Not romantic, maybe, but real. You're my partner, my friend. And partners don't abandon each other when the crisis ends. She looked at him with those gray eyes that had been so empty when she first arrived and were now full of cautious hope. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. It's a character flaw. She almost smiled. Thank you, Caleb, for everything. For believing me, protecting me, teaching me to fight back. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're going to win tomorrow. You can't know that. Yes, I can, because Jonathan Ashford has never faced anyone like you. You're not the frightened girl he remembers. You're something harder now, stronger. And when he sees that, when he realizes you're not afraid anymore, it's going to break him. I'm still afraid, she admitted quietly. Terrified, actually, but I'm also angry. And the anger is louder than the fear now. Good. Use it. Fear makes you cautious. Anger makes you dangerous. The third day dawned clear and cold. By noon, word came from the telegraph office. A train had arrived in the nearest rail station, 30 miles south. Passengers included a party of 7 men, well-dressed, well-armed, led by someone matching Jonathan Ashford's description. They'd be in Medicine Bow by evening. Caleb and Lydia rode to town early, found it transformed. Men stood on rooftops, rifles visible. Women gathered in groups, talking in low voices. Children had been sent to the schoolhouse with the older women, out of potential crossfire. The church was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. Not discussion, not planning. Preparation for battle. Sheriff Tucker stood at the front. All right, people, listen up. We got maybe 3 hours before they arrive. Here's how this plays out. When they show up, I meet them at the edge of town, alone. I ask for their credentials, their warrants, their legal authority. If everything's in order, it won't be, Lydia interrupted. She stood, faced the crowd. I know Jonathan. I know how he operates. He'll have documents that look perfect. But they won't be. And I can prove it. How? Someone called out. Federal documents require specific seals, specific signatures, specific formats. Jonathan's forgers are good, but they make consistent mistakes. They use the wrong type of paper, the wrong ink, the wrong watermarks. I can spot them. And if you're wrong, Dale Pritchard asked, if the documents are real and we're harboring a fugitive? Lydia met his gaze steadily. Then I'll surrender, turn myself over, face whatever legal process is required, but I'm not wrong, and I won't let him take me without a fight. Margaret Henderson stood. Neither will we. This town doesn't hand over its people to bullies, legal papers or not. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Tucker held up his hand. I appreciate the solidarity, but we do this by the book. We challenge their credentials. We demand proof. We force them into the open. But nobody fires unless fired upon. We clear? Reluctant nods. Good. Now, positions. Robert, you and your men take the rooftops. Samuel, you and the Chinese workers cover the east approach. Ward, you're with me when they arrive. Mrs. Ward stays in the church. No. Lydia's voice cut through the room like a blade. I'm not hiding. Not anymore. Jonathan needs to see me. Needs to see that I'm not afraid. Lydia, Caleb started. I'm not asking, Caleb. I'm telling. This is my fight. I started it by running, and I'm going to finish it by standing. Tucker looked at Caleb, who shrugged helplessly. She's made up her mind. All right, but you stay behind me, behind cover, and if shooting starts, you get yourself to safety. Deal? Deal. The crowd dispersed to their positions. Caleb pulled Lydia aside, voice low and urgent. You don't have to do this. Nobody would think less of you for staying protected. I would think less of me. She touched his arm gently. I've been running for so long, Caleb, hiding, pretending to be dead. I need this. Need to look him in the eye and show him he doesn't own me anymore. He's dangerous, unpredictable. If he realizes he can't win through legal means, then we fight, like you taught me. She pulled out the small revolver he'd given her, checked the cylinder with practiced ease. I'm ready. And looking at her face, fierce, determined, alive with purpose, Caleb believed her. They waited in the street as the sun crawled across the sky. Time moved strangely, too fast and too slow at once. Caleb checked his weapons for the 10th time. Tucker paced. Lydia stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the southern road. Then, as evening shadows started to lengthen, they appeared. 7 riders coming up the main street at a steady pace, not hurrying, not sneaking, bold as brass like they owned the place. The man in front matched Lydia's description exactly. Tall, dark-haired, expensively dressed even after 30 miles of travel. Handsome in that sharp, cold way that made Caleb think of predatory birds. And those eyes, pale blue, flat as coins. Jonathan Ashford. Behind him rode 6 men, all wearing badges, all armed. They looked professional, competent, exactly like federal marshals should look. But Caleb noticed the small things, the way their badges caught the light wrong, too shiny, the way their horses had matching brands, unlikely for government mounts, the way they moved in formation around Ashford, protective rather than official. These weren't lawmen. They were bodyguards playing dress-up. The riders stopped 30 feet from where Tucker stood. Ashford dismounted with practiced grace, smoothed his coat, and smiled. It was the smile Lydia had described, pleasant, charming, and absolutely empty. Good evening, Sheriff. I'm Jonathan Ashford from Boston. I believe my investigator, Mr. Whitmore, informed you of my arrival. He mentioned it. Tucker's voice was carefully neutral. What's your business in Medicine Bow, Mr. Ashford? I'm here to retrieve someone very precious to me. My fiancée, Lydia Mercer, who disappeared 3 months ago following a tragic fire. I have reason to believe she's here, going by the name Margaret Thompson. That is so? Well, I know a Mrs. Lydia Ward, married to Caleb Ward here, but no Margaret Thompson. Ashford's smile didn't waver, but his eyes shifted to Lydia. When he saw her, something flickered there, satisfaction, hunger, rage, all compressed into a single look that made Caleb's hand move to his gun. Lydia. Ashford's voice was soft, intimate, possessive. Thank heavens. I've been so worried. When you disappeared in the fire, I thought I'd lost you forever. Lydia didn't respond, didn't move, just stared at him with an expression Caleb couldn't read. I understand you've been through a terrible trauma, Ashford continued, still in that soothing tone. The fire, the confusion, the fear. It's made you confused, made you run. But I'm here now. You're safe. You can come home. I am home. Lydia's voice was steady, clear. And you're not taking me anywhere. Ashford's smile finally cracked, just slightly. Darling, you're not well. The doctors in Boston, they've all confirmed it. You need help, proper care. That's why I've brought these federal marshals, to ensure you get that care. Federal marshals? Tucker stepped forward. Then you'll have federal credentials, warrants, authorization from a federal judge. One of the mounted men produced papers, handed them to Tucker. Official-looking documents with impressive seals, detailed warrants, authorization for the transfer of one Lydia Mercer to the custody of her legal guardian, Jonathan Ashford, as determined by the Massachusetts Superior Court. Tucker studied them. These are dated 2 weeks ago. Fast work. I have excellent lawyers. And this seal here, this is from the Federal District Court in Massachusetts? That's correct. Tucker handed the papers to Lydia. Mrs. Ward, you said you could verify these? Lydia took them with steady hands, examined each page carefully. Caleb watched her eyes move across the text, studying details no one else would notice. The crowd had gathered now, 50 or 60 people lining the street, watching in absolute silence. After what felt like an eternity, Lydia looked up. These are forgeries. Ashford's expression went cold. That's a serious accusation. And I can prove it. This seal, the federal court seal, it's the wrong color. Federal seals use a specific shade of blue ink, manufactured exclusively by the Bureau of Engraving. This is navy blue, common commercial ink. And this signature here, supposedly from federal judge Harrison Bennett, it's missing his distinctive flourish on the final T. I've seen Judge Bennett's signature on legitimate documents. This isn't it. She handed the papers back to Tucker, who examined them more closely now, frowning. Furthermore, Lydia continued, her voice growing stronger, even if these were legitimate, they'd have no jurisdiction here. I'm not a citizen of Massachusetts. I'm not Lydia Mercer anymore. She died in that fire. I'm Lydia Ward, citizen of Wyoming Territory, legally married under my current legal identity. You're using a false name, Ashford snapped, the pleasant mask dropping away entirely. You stole the identity of a dead woman, faked your own death, and fled across the country. That's fraud. That's identity theft. That's survival. Lydia's eyes blazed. That's what you drove me to, Jonathan. 2 years of abuse, 2 years of violence. You broke my ribs. You burned my skin. You choked me unconscious because I dared to speak to another man. So yes, I faked my death. Because staying would have meant actually dying. Lies. But Ashford's voice had lost its smooth confidence. She's unwell, Sheriff. Delusional. That's why she needs to be in my care. Your care? Lydia unbuttoned her sleeve, pushed it up to reveal the scars. This is your care. And these. She pulled down her collar, showing burn marks. And these. She turned, showing through the thin fabric of her dress the shadow of deeper bruising. The crowd murmured, angry now. Ashford saw it, felt the mood shifting. Those could be from anything. An abusive husband, perhaps. He looked pointedly at Caleb. How do we know Mr. Ward here isn't the real culprit, and she's protecting him? Because I've examined those injuries, Ruth, the doctor's daughter, called from the crowd. Some are months old. They predate her marriage to Mr. Ward by significant time, and the patterns are consistent with systematic abuse, not isolated incidents. And we've all seen how gentle Caleb is with her, Margaret Henderson added. How careful. That's not a man who hurts women. Ashford was losing control of the situation, and Caleb could see desperation starting to show. Desperate men made bad choices. Sheriff, I'm ordering you as a representative of federal authority to turn over Miss Mercer immediately. If you refuse, you'll be charged with obstruction of justice, harboring a fugitive, and aiding in identity fraud." Tucker squared his shoulders. "And I'm telling you, as the elected sheriff of this county, that your documents are fraudulent, your authority is non-existent, and you and your fake marshals have about 10 seconds to mount up and ride out of my town before I arrest the lot of you for impersonating federal officers." Ashford's face went white with rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I own judges, senators. I can destroy this pathetic little town with a telegram. Maybe in Boston." Robert Henderson stepped forward, rifle in hand. "But you're in Wyoming now, and we don't take kindly to men who hurt women then hide behind bot law." More men stepped forward, weapons visible, 20, 30, 40. The whole town standing together. Ashford looked around, saw he was surrounded, outnumbered, and his perfect plan was falling apart. For just a moment, Caleb saw genuine fear in those cold blue eyes. Then the mask came back, and Ashford's voice went soft, dangerous. "Lydia, last chance. Come with me now, quietly, and I'll forgive all of this. We'll go home, get married like we planned, and forget this unfortunate episode ever happened." "No." "No?" His voice rose. "You think you have a choice? You think hiding behind these frontier trash will protect you? I will burn this town to the ground. I will see every one of them ruined, arrested, dead if necessary. And you will watch it happen, knowing it's your fault, before I drag you back to Boston in chains. Touch her, and you'll die before you take a step." Caleb's voice was quiet, absolutely certain. Ashford turned that cold smile on him. "You're brave, Mr. Ward. Foolish, but brave. Do you know what happens to men who cross me? I had a business rival murdered last year, made it look like a robbery. I've had judges removed, politicians destroyed, entire families financially ruined. You're a nobody, a dirt farmer with delusions of heroism. What makes you think—" He never finished, because Lydia shot him. Not to kill. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spun him around, dropped him to his knees. But the sound of the gunshot shattered the tense standoff like breaking glass. For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. Ashford's men went for their guns. The townspeople raised rifles. Tucker shouted for everyone to hold fire. And Lydia stood there, revolver still pointed at Ashford, her face calm and terrible. "That was for the first time you hit me," she said quietly. "Try to take me, and the next one goes through your head." Ashford clutched his bleeding shoulder, face twisted with shock and fury. "You shot me. You actually— Marshal! Arrest her! She just attempted murder in front of witnesses." But his marshals weren't moving. They'd seen the weapons pointed at them from every direction, done the math, and come up with a number that meant death if they drew. "Drop your guns," Tucker ordered. "All of you. Nice and slow. We're federal. You're criminals with fake badges. Drop them or we drop you." One by one, Ashford's men complied, carefully placing weapons on the ground. Tucker's deputies moved in to collect them. Ashford was on his knees, blood seeping through his expensive coat. And for the first time in probably his entire life, he had no power, no control, no way out. "You'll pay for this," he hissed at Lydia. "All of you. I'll see you hanged for assault, for defending myself?" Lydia crouched down to his level, close enough he could see the absolute absence of fear in her eyes. "Jonathan, listen to me very carefully. You have no power here. Your money means nothing. Your connections can't reach this far. You came to take me back, and instead, you're going to leave in handcuffs. And if you ever come near me again, I won't shoot to wound." She stood, turned to the crowd. "This man has spent 2 years making me believe I was powerless, that he owned me, that running was the only option. But I'm not running anymore. I'm standing, and I want everyone to hear this. Jonathan Ashford is an abuser, a manipulator, a man who uses wealth and fear to control people. But he's not untouchable. He bleeds like anyone else." The crowd erupted in agreement, voices rising in support. Ashford tried to stand, but Caleb put a boot on his chest, pressed him back down. "Stay down. The lady's talking." "I'll destroy you," Ashford whispered. "All of you. If it takes everything I have, you don't understand yet, do you?" Caleb leaned close. "You already lost. The moment you came here, the moment you thought you could take her back like she was property, you lost. Because these people, they don't bend to men like you. They break them." Tucker motioned to his deputies. "Lock them all up, and get the doc to look at that shoulder. Can't have him bleeding out before trial." As they hauled Ashford to his feet, he locked eyes with Lydia one last time. And what he saw there, the strength, the defiance, the complete absence of the frightened girl he remembered, seemed to break something in him. His shoulders slumped. His face went slack. He'd come to reclaim his property and instead found a woman who'd learned to fight back. They dragged him away, still protesting, still threatening. But the threat sounded hollow now, desperate. The crowd began to disperse, talking excitedly, reliving the confrontation, celebrating the victory. But Caleb saw the truth that no one else seemed to notice yet. This wasn't over. Jonathan Ashford was wounded, humiliated, caged, but he was also still alive, still wealthy, still connected. And men like that didn't accept defeat. They planned revenge, which meant the real war was just beginning. The celebration in Medicine Bow lasted exactly 4 hours. Then the telegraph office caught fire. Caleb saw the smoke first, a black plume rising against the twilight sky. He was standing outside Tucker's office with Lydia, both of them watching as the last of the townspeople headed home, still buzzing with triumph. The moment he saw that smoke, his gut twisted with certainty. "That's not an accident," he said. They ran toward the telegraph office, joining the bucket brigade already forming. But it was too late. The building was engulfed, flames licking through the roof, the heat so intense no one could get close. By the time they got the fire contained, there was nothing left but charred timber and ash. And one body. Old Henry Mills, the telegraph operator, found face down near what used to be his desk. The back of his skull caved in. "Murder," Tucker said flatly, examining the body by lantern light while the doctor confirmed what everyone could see. "Someone killed him, then torched the place to cover it up." "The telegraph records," Robert Henderson said, realization dawning. "Anything Henry sent or received, it's all gone now." Caleb looked at the ruins, then back toward the jail. "When did this start?" "Maybe an hour after we locked them up," someone called out. "Saw smoke, raised the alarm." An hour. Just enough time for one of Ashford's men to slip away in the confusion, circle back, eliminate the evidence. Caleb cursed himself for not seeing it coming. They'd been so focused on the confrontation in the street, they'd forgotten the basic rule of dealing with men like Jonathan Ashford. They always had a contingency plan. "Count the prisoners," Caleb told Tucker. "Right now." They ran to the jail. Tucker unlocked the cell area and Caleb's worst fear was confirmed. 6 men where there should have been 7. One of the marshals was gone. The cell door's lock expertly picked. The bars still warm where someone had used acid to weaken them before forcing them apart. Ashford sat in the remaining cell, shoulder bandaged, looking far too pleased with himself despite the pain. "Looking for someone, Sheriff?" His voice was weak from blood loss, but still carried that smug superiority. "I'm afraid Marshal Davidson had urgent business elsewhere. You understand, I'm sure." "That wasn't a marshal," Tucker snapped. "That was a hired criminal, and when we catch him—" "You won't." Ashford shifted carefully, favoring his wounded shoulder. "Davidson is very good at what he does, and right now, what he's doing is ensuring certain communications reach certain people back east, people with actual federal authority, real judges, real marshals." "The telegraph's destroyed," Lydia said from the doorway. "He can't send anything." "The telegraph in Medicine Bow is destroyed. But there's another station 30 miles south. Davidson will reach it by morning, and by tomorrow night, this entire town will be swarming with real federal agents investigating the assault on a Boston businessman by a fugitive using a false identity." Ashford's smile was cold, triumphant. "Did you really think this was over? That shooting me would end it?" Caleb felt the trap closing. They'd won the battle, but walked straight into a bigger war. Those federal agents, they'll have real authority, real jurisdiction. Oh yes, and they'll find a wounded man, held illegally by a sheriff who refused to honor legitimate court documents. They'll find a woman who faked her death, stole an identity, and committed assault with a deadly weapon in front of dozens of witnesses. Ashford leaned back against the cell wall. By the time they're done, half this town will be facing federal charges, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. Maybe even insurrection, depending on how I decide to frame it. The silence in that jail was suffocating. "You're bluffing," Tucker said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Those documents were forgeries." "The ones I brought were, yes, but Davidson is carrying authenticated copies from actual federal courts, emergency protective orders, competency hearings. All perfectly legal, all perfectly enforceable." Ashford's eyes found Lydia. "I told you I always have a backup plan, darling. You should have come quietly when you had the chance." Lydia's hand moved to the revolver at her hip, and for a moment Caleb thought she might shoot Ashford again. Instead, she spoke with icy calm. "How long do we have?" "Before the real marshals arrive? 3 days. Maybe 4 if the weather's bad." Ashford coughed, grimaced in pain. "Of course, that assumes Davidson makes it to the telegraph station, 30 miles through hostile territory, being hunted by an entire town. He might not survive the journey." "Is that a suggestion?" Robert asked darkly. "It's a fact. If Davidson doesn't send those telegrams, my lawyers back east will eventually send them anyway. But it would take weeks, maybe months, time for things to settle, for memories to fade, for witnesses to reconsider their statements." Ashford's smile widened. "Of course, if Davidson does die out there, and it looks like murder, that's just more ammunition for the federal case. So really, you're damned either way." Caleb turned to Tucker. "We need to talk. Outside." They gathered in Tucker's office: Caleb, Lydia, Robert, Margaret, Samuel Chen, and a few of the other community leaders. The mood was grim. "He's right," Tucker said, slumping into his chair. "If real federal marshals show up with legitimate warrants, I can't stop them. And everything we did tonight, refusing to honor his documents, surrounding him with armed citizens, Lydia shooting him, it all looks bad when framed the right way." "So we run," Margaret said. "Get Lydia out of here tonight, somewhere they can't find her." "Where?" Lydia asked. "Jonathan has resources across the country." "Mexico? Canada? How long before his investigators track me down again? And what about all of you? You stood up for me. That won't be forgotten or forgiven." "She's right," Samuel said quietly. "Men like Ashford don't just punish the target. They punish everyone involved. Make examples. I've seen it before back in California during the railroad days. Rich men using the law as a weapon." "Then what's the play?" Robert demanded. "We can't run, can't fight, can't hide. What's left?" Caleb had been thinking, turning over possibilities, discarding them one by one. Now an idea formed, dangerous and probably insane, but maybe the only option they had. "We go public," he said. "All the way public. Not just Medicine Bow, not just Wyoming Territory. National." Everyone stared at him. "Eastern newspapers," he continued, the plan solidifying as he spoke. "The big ones. New York Tribune, Boston Herald, Philadelphia Inquirer. We tell them everything. The abuse, the fake documents, the intimidation. We make Jonathan Ashford so publicly toxic that even his money can't protect him." "How?" Lydia asked. "We have no connections to those papers, no way to—" "We have the telegraph." Caleb pointed south. "Same station Davidson's heading for. We get there first, send the story ourselves, every sordid detail, every piece of evidence, and we send it to every major newspaper we can think of." Tucker was nodding slowly. "Public opinion. Turn his weapon against him." "Exactly. Right now, we're nobody's fighting a powerful man. But if we make this a national story, wealthy Boston businessman hunts down escaped fiancée, tries to kidnap her from frontier town using forged federal documents. Suddenly, we're victims, and he's the villain." "The newspapers might not care," Margaret pointed out. "Might not even print it." They will if we give them a story they can't resist." Lydia's eyes were bright now, sharp with understanding. "A damsel in distress, a brave frontier town standing up to Eastern corruption. Violence, romance, justice. It's perfect for their audience." "And once it's out there," Robert added, "Ashford can't bury it. Federal marshals might still come, but they'll be walking into a circus. Public scrutiny, reporters, attention he can't control." It was risky. If they failed to reach the telegraph station first, or if the newspapers didn't pick up the story, they'd have wasted precious time. But looking around the room, Caleb saw the same determination he felt. "I'll go," he said. Fast horse, light travel. I can make the station by dawn if I push hard. Not alone. Lydia stood. I'm coming too. Lydia, this is my story to tell, Caleb. My words carry more weight than yours. And if Davidson's out there, if we encounter him, you might need backup. She was right, and he knew it. Fine. But we leave within the hour and we don't stop for anything. I'm sending men with you, Robert said firmly. At least 2. Safety in numbers, and if Davidson tries something, no. Lydia shook her head. More riders mean slower travel, easier to track. Caleb and I move faster alone. The woman's got a point, Samuel agreed. 2 riders on fast horses, they can cover 30 miles in 4, maybe 5 hours. A group takes twice that long. Tucker stood, moved to his gun cabinet. Take these. Extra ammunition, spare rifles, and this. He handed Caleb a leather satchel. Documentation. Marriage certificate, medical reports on Lydia's injuries, witness statements from the town meeting, everything we've got in writing to support your story. Margaret pressed a package of food into Lydia's hands. Don't be a hero. If you see Davidson, avoid him. Your job is to get that story sent, not to fight. Understood. Lydia's voice was steady, but Caleb could see fear flickering beneath the confidence. Not fear of Davidson or the journey, fear of what happened if they failed. They prepared quickly. Caleb saddled his fastest horse, a roan gelding named Smoke. Lydia took her mare, lighter and nearly as fast. They packed minimal supplies, food, water, ammunition, the satchel of documents. Every ounce mattered when you were racing against time. The town gathered to see them off, faces grim in the lamplight. These people had stood with them once. Now Caleb and Lydia were riding into the dark to save them all. 4 days, Tucker said. That's how long I can hold things here if the marshals come. Make those days count. We will. Caleb swung into the saddle, felt Smoke shift beneath him, eager to run. Lydia mounted with practiced ease, no longer the uncertain rider who'd arrived a month ago. She'd transformed completely, hard where she'd been soft, fierce where she'd been frightened. The woman Jonathan Ashford had tried to break was gone, replaced by something he'd never anticipated. A fighter. They rode out of Medicine Bow at a gallop, hoofbeats echoing off the buildings, then fading as they hit the open grassland. The night was cold and clear, stars providing just enough light to see by. Caleb set a punishing pace, knowing the horses could handle it for a few hours before they'd need to slow. Behind them, the town disappeared into darkness. Ahead, 30 miles of frontier, and one man with a head start who absolutely could not be allowed to reach that telegraph station first. They rode in silence for the first hour, focused on the rhythm of the horses, the feel of the land beneath them. But as the adrenaline of departure faded, the reality of what they were attempting settled in. "Caleb," Lydia called over the thunder of hooves. "If we don't make it, if Davidson gets there first, we'll make it. But if we don't, if the marshals come and take me back, promise me something." He slowed slightly so they could ride side by side. "What?" "Don't blame yourself. Don't spend the rest of your life thinking you should have done more, should have been faster, should have—" "Stop." His voice was sharp. "We're going to make it, Lydia. We're going to send that story, turn public opinion against Ashford, and burn his whole corrupt empire to the ground. That's what's happening." "You can't know that." "Yes, I can. Because failure isn't an option. Not for you, not for me, not for Medicine Bow." He looked at her in the starlight, saw fear and hope warring in her eyes. "You asked me once why I cared so much about a stranger. You want the real answer?" She nodded. "Because I'm tired of watching powerful men destroy good people and face no consequences. Because the war taught me that sometimes the right thing is the hard thing. And because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger and became someone I'd ride through hell for." He paused. "So no, I won't promise to accept failure. I'll promise to fight until there's no fight left." Lydia's expression softened, and for a moment she looked less like a warrior and more like the frightened woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach a lifetime ago. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything." Then the moment passed, and they were riding hard again, eating up the miles. They'd covered maybe 15 miles when Caleb saw it. A flicker of light ahead, off the main trail. A campfire, small and struggling against the wind. He signaled Lydia to stop, and they dismounted, leading the horses quietly toward a rise that would give them a view of the camp. What Caleb saw made his blood run cold. Davidson. Had to be. A single man, nursing a fire, his horse tethered nearby. But he wasn't alone. 3 other men sat around that fire, and even from a distance, Caleb could see they were frontier types. Rough clothes, hard faces, weapons close at hand. The kind of men who hired out for jobs that required loose morals and tight lips. Davidson had reinforcements. How? Lydia whispered. How did he get more men this fast? Caleb studied the camp, mind racing. He didn't. They were already here. Ashford's backup plan had a backup plan. These men were probably waiting along the route, ready to help if things went wrong. 4 against 2, Lydia checked her revolver. Bad odds. Worse than that. We can't go around them. They're camped right on the only good trail to the telegraph station. The alternative routes add hours we don't have. So we go through them. Lydia, you said failure wasn't an option. Her voice was hard, determined. Those men are between us and saving Medicine Bow, so we go through them. Caleb wanted to argue, to find another way. But looking at that camp, at the deliberate positioning that blocked their path, he knew she was right. This was the confrontation Jonathan Ashford had planned for, the moment his enemies would have to choose between fighting impossible odds or turning back. Ashford had underestimated one critical factor. They'd already chosen. All right, Caleb said quietly, but we do this smart. No heroics, no fair fights. We hit them fast, hit them hard, and we don't stop moving. What's the plan? He studied the terrain, the camp layout, the positions of the horses. An idea formed, desperate but possible. You see that dried creek bed running past their camp? Cuts pretty deep, maybe 6 feet. You could get close using that as cover, come up on their blind side. While you do what? Create a distraction. Pull their attention one direction while you hit from another. He pulled out his rifle, checked the load. When you hear shooting, that's your signal. You go for their horses, stampede them. Without mounts, they can't chase us, can't reach the telegraph station before we do. Lydia was quiet for a moment, then nodded. It could work. It has to work. He handed her extra ammunition, made sure her weapons were ready. Once those horses are running, you get to your mare and you ride. Don't wait for me. Don't look back. I'll be right behind you. Caleb, don't argue. Your job is to reach that telegraph station. Mine is to make sure you can. He met her eyes. This is what we trained for. What you trained for. You're ready. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of trust and gratitude and fear all combined. Then she was moving, slipping down the slope toward the creek bed, silent as smoke. Caleb waited, counting heartbeats, giving her time to get into position. The men around the fire were talking, passing a bottle, completely unaware. Overconfident, probably. 4 armed men against 2 riders. They probably thought it would be easy if it came to a fight. They were about to learn different. When he figured Lydia had enough time, Caleb raised his rifle and fired 3 shots in quick succession. Not at the men, but at the rocks near their fire, sending stone fragments flying and turning their camp into chaos. The men scattered, grabbing weapons, shouting questions. Davidson was yelling orders, trying to organize a response. They thought they were under attack from the rise where Caleb had fired from. They were looking the wrong direction. Lydia emerged from the creek bed like a ghost, revolver in hand. She didn't aim for the men. She aimed for the rope tethering their horses. 1 shot severed it. The horses, already spooked by gunfire, needed no further encouragement. They bolted, taking the men's supplies and saddles with them. Davidson spun, saw Lydia, raised his gun. Caleb fired again, forcing him to dive for cover. Then Caleb was running, sliding down the slope toward where Smoke waited. Lydia already mounting her mare, bullets kicked up dirt around them. One whine passed Caleb's ear, close enough he felt the heat. He reached Smoke, vaulted into the saddle, and they were running, hooves pounding, leaving chaos and cursing behind them. Return fire chased them for maybe 100 yards, then stopped. The men were on foot now, no way to pursue. But Caleb knew this wasn't over. They'd find their horses eventually, or steal others, and then the chase would resume. But by then, with any luck, it would be too late. They rode hard for another 2 hours, pushing the horses to their limits. When they finally slowed to give the animals a breather, both Caleb and Lydia were exhausted, running on pure adrenaline and determination. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "I shot at people." Lydia's voice was shaky. "Actually shot at them. I could have killed, but you didn't. You did exactly what needed doing, no more, no less. That took control, discipline." He reached over, squeezed her shoulder. "You did good back there. It doesn't feel good. It feels terrible. That's how you know you're not like them. The day it feels good is the day you've lost something important." Caleb scanned the horizon behind them, saw nothing but darkness. "We've got maybe 10 miles left. Can you make it?" Lydia straightened in her saddle, and despite the fear and exhaustion, her voice was steady. "I can make it." They rode on as false dawn began to gray the eastern sky. The telegraph station appeared as the sun broke the horizon, a small wooden building next to the railroad tracks, smoke rising from its chimney. They'd made it. Caleb and Lydia dismounted on trembling legs, every muscle screaming. But there was no time to rest. They had to get that story sent before Davidson's men recovered, before Jonathan Ashford's plan could unfold, before the real federal marshals arrived and turned everything into a legal nightmare. The telegraph operator was a young man named Charlie, barely 20, who looked startled when they burst through the door. "I need to send urgent messages," Caleb said, pulling out the satchel of documents. "Multiple recipients, Eastern newspapers, and I need them sent now." That's a lot of messages," Charlie stammered, looking at the list Caleb handed him. "And some of these addresses they'll take time to confirm." Lydia slammed a handful of bills on the counter, money Tucker had given them for exactly this purpose. "We'll pay triple your usual rate, but we need them sent within the hour." Charlie looked at the money, then at their faces, desperate, exhausted, determined. Whatever he saw there convinced him. "All right, start dictating." For the next 40 minutes, Lydia told her story while Charlie's fingers flew across the telegraph key. Every detail of her abuse, every moment of Jonathan Ashford's cruelty, the fake death, the flight west, the confrontation in Medicine Bow. She spoke clearly, precisely, holding nothing back. And as she spoke, Caleb watched her transform one final time. Not into something harder or fiercer, but into something he hadn't expected, someone free. The fear that had shadowed her since arrival was gone, burned away by this act of ultimate defiance. She wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't running. She was standing in the light, telling the truth, daring the world to look at what had been done to her and call it acceptable. When she finished, Charlie looked shaken. "Ma'am, I'm sorry you went through that. I'll make sure these get to every paper on your list." "Can you confirm they were received?" Caleb asked. "Should get acknowledgments within a few hours. I'll send riders to Medicine Bow with confirmation soon as I have it." They stumbled outside into the morning light, and Lydia collapsed against the wall, sliding down to sit on the wooden platform. Caleb sat beside her, both of them too exhausted to move. "We did it," she said quietly. "Whatever happens now, the truth is out there. Jonathan can't bury it. He'll try. He'll claim you're lying, that you're mentally unstable, that let him try. I'm not afraid of him anymore." She turned to look at Caleb, and her eyes were clear, unburdened. "For 2 years, I carried his voice in my head, telling me I was worthless, powerless, his to control. But I'm not, am I? I faked my own death, crossed half a country, stood up to him in front of an entire town. And now I've told the whole world what he is. That's not powerless. That's not worthless." "No," Caleb agreed. "That's the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." They sat there as the sun climbed higher, waiting for confirmation that the messages had been received, knowing that somewhere behind them, men were coming. Men with guns and badges and warrants, men who served Jonathan Ashford's will, whether they knew it or not. But they'd done what they came to do. The story was out, and sometimes the truth was weapon enough. Around noon, Charlie came out with a telegraph slip. "Got acknowledgments from the New York Tribune, the Boston Herald, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. All 3 are sending reporters to Wyoming. Should arrive within a week." "A week?" Lydia's face fell. "The marshals will be here in days." "Then we make those days count," Caleb said, standing and offering her his hand. Come on, we've got one more ride ahead of us. They mounted up, every bone aching, and began the long journey back to Medicine Bow. But as they rode, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were riding toward something bigger than they'd anticipated. They'd started a fire with those telegrams, and fires had a way of spreading beyond control. The question was whether that fire would burn away Jonathan Ashford's power or consume Medicine Bow in the process. They were about to find out. They were 5 miles from Medicine Bow when they saw the smoke. Not the thin wisps of cooking fires or chimney smoke, but thick black columns rising into the afternoon sky, the kind that meant destruction on a scale that turned Caleb's stomach to ice. "No," Lydia whispered, and then she was kicking her mare into a gallop, exhaustion forgotten, fear driving her forward. Caleb followed, his own heart hammering against his ribs. They'd been gone less than 24 hours. What could have happened in that time? As they crested the final ridge, the answer spread out before them in terrible clarity. The ranch was burning, not just the barn or an outbuilding, everything, the house, the stables, the feed storage, all of it consumed by flames so fierce the heat could be felt from half a mile away. And around the perimeter, he could see figures on horseback, maybe a dozen men, watching it burn. Lydia made a sound like a wounded animal. "Caleb, you're home. Forget the ranch. Ichaite, thati." His voice was hard, cold. "Look toward town." More smoke there, smaller fires scattered through Medicine Bow. Buildings burning, people running, and even from this distance, the crack of gunfire carried on the wind. Ashford hadn't waited for the marshals. He'd unleashed hell. They rode hard toward town, and as they got closer, the full scope of the devastation became clear. The general store was aflame. The saloon had been ransacked, windows shattered. The church, the community's gathering place, their symbol of unity, had a gaping hole in its roof where something explosive had torn through. And in the street, armed men prowled like wolves, wearing badges but moving with the casual brutality of hired killers. Tucker's office was still standing, and that's where the townspeople had gathered, maybe 50 or 60 of them, surrounded by the armed men. Some of the townspeople were injured, bloodied. Others looked terrified. A few held weapons but were clearly outgunned and outnumbered. At the center of it all stood Jonathan Ashford. His shoulder was still bandaged, his face pale from blood loss, but he was upright, in control, and absolutely triumphant. Next to him stood a tall man in a federal marshal's uniform that actually looked legitimate, holding papers that probably were too. Caleb and Lydia dismounted at the edge of town, staying in the shadows. They needed to understand the situation before walking into it. "That's Marshal Raymond Hayes," Lydia said quietly, recognizing the tall man. "He's real. I've seen him at social functions in Boston. He's on Jonathan's payroll, has been for years, but he's an actual federal marshal with actual authority. And the others? Hired guns, but Hayes gives them legitimacy. Whatever they do, he can claim was done under federal authority." Caleb watched as Hayes addressed the crowd, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "By order of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts and the Territorial Governor of Wyoming, I am hereby executing a warrant for the arrest of Margaret Thompson, also known as Lydia Mercer, on charges of identity theft, fraud, and assault with a deadly weapon. Anyone harboring or protecting the fugitive will be charged with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact." "She's not here," Robert Henderson shouted from the crowd. "And even if she was, we wouldn't turn her over to you." Hayes's expression didn't change. "Then you're under arrest. All of you. Conspiracy to harbor a fugitive is a federal offense. You can't arrest an entire town. I can arrest as many people as necessary to execute my warrant. Mr. Ashford has been very generous in funding additional deputies to assist in this matter." Hayes gestured to the armed men surrounding the townspeople. "Now, I'll ask one more time. Where's Lydia Mercer?" Silence. Defiant, absolute silence. Ashford stepped forward, that cold smile on his face. "This is unfortunate. I had hoped to resolve this peacefully, but since this community has chosen to obstruct federal law, I'm afraid stronger measures are necessary. Marshal Hayes, burn the rest of the town, starting with the homes of anyone who attended that meeting where they publicly defamed my character." "Wait!" Margaret Henderson's voice rang out. "You can't just burn people's homes. There are families here, children." "Then they should have thought about that before sheltering a criminal," Ashford's voice was ice. "I gave you all a chance to do the right thing. You chose rebellion. Now you face the consequences." Hayes looked uncomfortable but nodded to his men. "You heard, Mr. Ashford. Proceed." That's when Lydia stepped into the open. "Stop!" Every head turned. Jonathan Ashford's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and finally, that terrible satisfaction. "Lydia, how good of you to join us." He took a step toward her, and Caleb moved to intercept, hand on his gun. Ashford stopped, held up his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, Mr. Ward. I'm not going to touch her. Marshal Hayes will handle things from here, legally, properly." Hayes approached Lydia with handcuffs drawn. "Lydia Mercer, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." "I know my rights." Lydia's voice was steady, clear. "And I know those warrants you're holding are based on false testimony and manufactured evidence. Jonathan Ashford is a criminal who uses wealth and connections to abuse the legal system. That's a serious accusation against a respected businessman." "It's the truth, and I can prove it." Lydia pulled out a folded paper from her coat, a copy of one of the telegrams they'd sent. "As of this morning, the full story of Jonathan Ashford's abuse has been sent to every major newspaper on the East Coast. The New York Tribune, the Boston Herald, the Philadelphia Inquirer. All of them now have detailed accounts of his crimes, supported by medical evidence, witness testimony, and documentation of his fraudulent legal tactics." Ashford's face went white. "You did what?" "I told the truth. And by now, reporters are already on their way here. They'll arrive within days, maybe sooner. When they do, they'll see this." She gestured to the burning buildings, the armed men, the terrified townspeople. "They'll see a wealthy man using hired guns and a corrupt marshal to terrorize an entire community. They'll see violence, intimidation, and abuse of federal authority, and they'll report every detail to the entire country." Hayes's expression had changed, uncertainty creeping in. "Marshal, is this true? Are reporters coming?" "It doesn't matter," Ashford snapped. "We have legal authority here. What some newspapers print is irrelevant." "It's very relevant," Caleb said, stepping forward. "Because the moment this becomes a national story, every action you take here gets scrutinized. Every warrant gets questioned. Every use of force gets investigated. You're not operating in the shadows anymore, Ashford. You're in the light, and we're going to make sure you stay there." Ashford's mask was cracking, rage bleeding through. "Hayes, arrest them both, now, and burn the rest of this pathetic town to the ground. I want nothing left standing." But Hayes was hesitating, looking at the papers in his hand with new concern. "Mr. Ashford, if what they're saying is true, if reporters are coming, we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Any excessive force, any questionable tactics." "I don't pay you to be careful. I pay you to do what I tell you." Ashford's voice had risen, control slipping. "Arrest her!" "Marshal Hayes," Tucker stepped forward, badge visible on his chest. "I'm the elected sheriff of this county. These people are my responsibility. And I'm telling you right now, you arrest anyone else, burn one more building, and I will personally ensure that when those reporters arrive, they hear exactly how a federal marshal terrorized a town on behalf of a violent criminal." "I am not a criminal," Ashford was shouting now, face flushed. "I am the victim here. Lydia is mine. She was promised to me, agreed to marry me, and then she ran like a coward instead of honoring her commitment." "I'm not a possession, Jonathan." Lydia's voice cut through his rant like a blade. "I'm a person, and I never agreed to be beaten, burned, controlled, and degraded. That's not marriage. That's slavery." "You ungrateful—" Ashford lunged toward her, and three things happened simultaneously. Caleb drew his revolver and put himself between them. A dozen townspeople surged forward, weapons raised, and Hayes grabbed Ashford's arm, physically restraining him. "Mr. Ashford, I strongly advise you to calm down." Hayes's voice was firm now, professional. "You're making this situation worse." "Worse?" Ashford jerked free, spinning on the marshal. "How could it possibly be worse? That woman has destroyed my reputation, made me a laughingstock, shot me, and now she's trying to paint me as some kind of monster in the press." "You are a monster," Annie Pollard called out from the crowd. "I stood up in the meeting and told everyone about my abusive first husband. You're just like him. Maybe worse, because you hide it behind money and charm. Other voices joined hers, women stepping forward, sharing their own stories of abuse, of men who smiled in public and terrorized in private, of systems that protected the powerful and abandoned the vulnerable. And something remarkable happened. Hayes, this hardened federal marshal who'd seen everything, started to really listen. "These women," he said slowly, looking at Ashford, "they're not lying. I've been doing this job long enough to know truth when I hear it." He turned to Lydia. "Show me the scars. The ones you mentioned in your telegraph." Lydia hesitated, then began unbuttoning her sleeve. But before she could, Margaret Henderson stepped forward. "I'm a nurse. I examined her injuries when she first arrived. Burns, fractures, deep bruising consistent with repeated trauma over an extended period. Some injuries were months old, some were healing, and the patterns—" She looked directly at Hayes. "Marshal, I've treated ranch accidents, animal attacks, falls from horses. This wasn't any of that. This was deliberate, systematic violence." Ruth, the doctor's daughter, joined her. "I can confirm. The medical evidence is conclusive." Hayes looked at the papers in his hand, Ashford's carefully constructed warrants and court orders, then at Lydia's face, at the crowd of people willing to stand against federal authority to protect her, at the burning buildings that spoke to Ashford's capacity for vindictive destruction. "Mr. Ashford, I'm going to need you to come with me. We need to discuss the validity of these warrants." "What?" Ashford's voice rose to a near shriek. "I'm the one who hired you. I'm the one paying for all of this." "And that's part of the problem." Hayes signaled to two of his actual deputies, not the hired guns, but real federal officers. "Take Mr. Ashford into custody, protective custody," he added, seeing Ashford's expression, "until we can sort out the legal situation." "You can't do this. I have connections. I'll have your badge. But the deputies were already moving, taking Ashford's arms firmly. He struggled, shouted threats and curses, but they held him fast. Then, as they led him past Lydia, Ashford broke free for just a moment. His hand went inside his coat, emerging with a small pistol, the kind wealthy men carried for protection. Time seemed to slow. Ashford raised the gun, pointed it at Lydia, his face twisted with pure hatred. "If I can't have you, no one will." Caleb moved, but he was too far away, too slow. It was Lydia who acted. She drew her revolver with the speed and precision Caleb had drilled into her over hours of practice, and she fired. Once. Clean. Final. The bullet took Ashford in the chest, center mass, exactly where Caleb had taught her to aim. He staggered backward, the pistol falling from his hand, a look of absolute shock on his face. "You shot me," he whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Again. This time I wasn't aiming for your shoulder." Lydia's voice was cold, empty of emotion. "You said if I ever tried to leave, you'd kill me. I'm just defending myself. Again." Ashford collapsed, blood spreading across his expensive coat. The doctor rushed forward, but even from a distance, Caleb could see it was bad. Maybe fatal. Hayes stood frozen, gun half drawn, processing what had just happened. "He drew first," Tucker said quickly. "At least 30 witnesses saw it. Ashford pulled a concealed weapon and aimed it at Mrs. Ward. She fired in self-defense." "She's right," Robert Henderson added. "Clear case of justified shooting." "He threatened to kill her," Margaret confirmed. "His exact words were, 'If I can't have you, no one will.' That's premeditated, attempted murder." Hayes looked around at the crowd, saw the absolute unity in their faces, then looked down at Ashford, who was being tended by the doctor, but clearly dying. "All right," he said finally. "Everyone stand back. This is now a federal investigation into an officer-involved shooting. Nobody leaves town until I've taken statements." But his tone had changed. He wasn't treating this as a criminal act. He was treating it as exactly what it was, a woman defending her life against a man who'd promised to end it. The doctor worked on Ashford for 20 minutes, but it was futile. The bullet had done too much damage. As the sun set over Medicine Bow, Jonathan Ashford, wealthy businessman, abuser, manipulator, died in the dust of a frontier town he'd tried to destroy, killed by the woman he'd thought he owned. His last words were to Lydia, whispered as she stood over him at the doctor's request. "I loved you," he said, blood on his lips. "No," she replied quietly. "You loved owning me. You never knew the difference." Then he was gone. The aftermath took days to sort out. Hayes and his actual federal deputies stayed in Medicine Bow, investigating, taking statements, examining evidence. The hired guns Ashford had brought disappeared the moment their paymaster died, melting into the frontier like smoke. And the reporters came, just as Lydia had predicted. 3 of them, from different newspapers, arriving within 48 hours of each other. They found a town still cleaning up from Ashford's rampage, still burying the one townsperson who died in the fires, still processing the trauma of near destruction. But they also found something else. A community that had stood together against overwhelming odds. Women who'd found their voices after years of silence, and a widow who'd killed her abuser in self-defense and felt no shame about it. The stories they wrote went national within a week. The Boston Herald ran a front-page piece titled "Frontier Justice: How Wyoming Town Stood Against Boston Tyrant." The New York Tribune published a serialized account of Lydia's abuse and escape. The Philadelphia Inquirer investigated Ashford's business dealings and uncovered years of fraud, intimidation, and violence hidden behind a facade of respectability. Within a month, Jonathan Ashford's empire collapsed. His business partners distanced themselves. His political connections severed ties. His family publicly disowned his memory. The man who'd seemed untouchable was posthumously destroyed, his name becoming synonymous with the worst kind of abuse and corruption. Marshal Hayes, to his credit, submitted a full report to the federal authorities clearing Lydia of all charges and recommending investigation into the judges and officials Ashford had bribed over the years. Several ended up facing their own legal troubles. The warrants were dismissed. The charges dropped. Lydia Mercer, now legally Lydia Ward, as the courts recognized her marriage under her new identity, was free. Truly, finally free. But freedom came with a cost. Caleb's ranch was gone, burned to nothing. Several buildings in Medicine Bow were destroyed. One good man, Samuel Chen's son-in-law, had died fighting the fires. The physical damage would take months to repair. The emotional damage would take longer. 2 weeks after Ashford's death, Caleb stood in the ruins of his ranch house, looking at what remained. The stone fireplace, blackened but standing, the metal stove, twisted by heat. Everything else was ash. "We can rebuild." He turned to find Lydia beside him, picking through the debris. She'd changed in the days since the shooting, quieter, more thoughtful, but also more at peace than he'd ever seen her. "With what money?" Caleb asked, though not bitterly, just stating fact. "Everything I had went into this place." "With Ashford's money." She held up a telegram. "His estate is being liquidated to pay off his victims. The lawyers handling it contacted me. As his intended wife and the person who suffered the most documented abuse, I'm entitled to a significant portion." "You're rich?" "We're rich." She corrected him with a small smile. "You're my husband, remember? What's mine is yours." Caleb looked at the telegram, at the number written there, and felt dizzy. It was more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes of ranching. "Lydia, that's your money, your compensation for what you suffered. I can't." "You can, and you will." She moved closer, her voice firm. "Caleb, you lost everything defending me. Your home, your livelihood, nearly your life. The least I can do is help you rebuild." "Rebuild here? After everything that happened?" "Why not? This is our home now. Mine and yours and Medicine Bow's." She looked around at the ruins. "Ashford tried to destroy this place and failed. We're still standing, still together. That means something." She was right. It did mean something. Over the next months, they rebuilt. Not just the ranch, but better. A larger house, more outbuildings, proper facilities. They hired some of the townspeople who'd lost work in the fires, paying fair wages, creating jobs. The ranch became a true operation, successful and sustainable. But Lydia didn't stop there. She used Ashford's money to do what he'd never intended: help people. She funded the rebuilding of Medicine Bow's destroyed buildings. She established a fund to help women escaping dangerous situations, providing them with travel money, legal assistance, safe places to stay. She worked with the territorial government to strengthen laws against domestic violence, to create legal pathways for women to escape abusive marriages. Word spread. Women started coming to Medicine Bow from across the territory, some seeking refuge, others seeking help, still others just seeking hope that they too could fight back and survive. Lydia met with each one personally, sharing her story, offering support, teaching them the same lessons Caleb had taught her: how to fight, how to survive, how to stop being afraid. A year after Ashford's death, Medicine Bow had transformed. What had been a dying frontier town was now a thriving community, known across the West as a place where women could find help, where justice meant something, where standing up to power was possible. And at the center of it all was Lydia Ward. She'd become something she'd never expected: a leader. Women looked to her for guidance, for inspiration, for proof that survival was possible. She organized town meetings where difficult topics were discussed openly. She trained women in self-defense, taught them about their legal rights, connected them with resources and support. Caleb watched her transformation with quiet pride. The frightened woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach was gone completely. In her place was someone strong, confident, purposeful. Someone who'd taken her trauma and turned it into power, not power over others, but power to help, to heal, to change things. Their marriage, which had started as a practical arrangement, deepened into genuine partnership. Not romantic love exactly, though affection and respect had grown between them, but something perhaps more valuable: true friendship, mutual support, shared purpose. They worked together to expand the ranch's mission. They took in not just women, but families fleeing violence or hardship. They created a network of safe houses across the territory. They lobbied for legal reforms and supported politicians who understood that protecting the vulnerable wasn't charity, it was justice. 2 years after the burning, Lydia stood before another packed town meeting, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory. The territorial legislature had just passed a comprehensive domestic violence law, largely due to her advocacy and the pressure from the coalition she'd built. "This law isn't perfect," she told the crowd, "but it's a start. It gives women legal recourse when their husbands abuse them. It allows for protective orders, emergency custody of children, division of property. It recognizes that violence in the home is a crime, not a private matter." The crowd erupted in applause, but Lydia held up her hand. "This didn't happen because of me alone. It happened because this community stood together, because women found their voices, because men like Sheriff Tucker, Robert Henderson, and my husband Caleb understood that protecting the vulnerable protects everyone." She paused, emotion thick in her voice. 2 years ago, I came here running for my life, broken and afraid. You gave me safety. You gave me a chance to heal, and together we've built something that will help countless others who are where I was." More applause, louder now. "But we can't stop here. For every woman we've helped, there are dozens more who don't know help exists. For every law we pass, there are men who'll find ways around it. We have to keep fighting, keep speaking out, keep refusing to accept violence as normal or inevitable." She looked out at the crowd, saw faces she'd come to know and love, saw women who'd arrived broken and were now whole, saw men who'd learned that strength meant protecting, not dominating, saw a community that had faced destruction and chosen to rebuild better. "So I'm asking you, all of you, don't let this be the end. Let it be the beginning. Take what we've learned here, what we've built here, and spread it. Help the next person. Stand up to the next bully. Tell the next woman that she deserves better, that she can fight back, that she can survive." She sat down to thunderous applause, and Caleb reached over to squeeze her hand. "Good speech," he murmured. "Good life," she replied. "Thanks to you." As the meeting broke up and people came to congratulate Lydia, to share their own stories of survival and success, Caleb slipped outside. He stood on the church steps, looking at Medicine Bow in the fading light. The town had changed so much. New buildings, new businesses, new people. But the essence remained the same, a community of people who'd come to the frontier seeking something better, and had found it by building it themselves. "You thinking about the past?" Lydia's voice came from behind him. "The future, actually." He turned to her. "Thinking about all those women who are going to hear your story, see what you've built, and find the courage to do the same. About how many lives are going to be different because you refused to stay a victim." "We refused," she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Maybe, but you started it. You chose to run, to fight, to stand up. Everything else grew from that choice. They stood together in comfortable silence as night fell over Wyoming, over the town they'd defended and rebuilt, over the ranch that had become a sanctuary, over the life they'd created from ashes and hope. Somewhere in the distance, Caleb heard a train whistle, probably bringing more people west, more dreamers and escapees, more folks seeking a fresh start in untamed country. Some of them would end up here, in Medicine Bow. Some would hear Lydia's story and find strength in it. And the cycle would continue. Survival leading to strength, strength leading to action, action leading to change. "What are you thinking about?" Lydia asked. "About how you told me once that staying in Boston would have killed you. About how you were right, Lydia Mercer died in that fire. But someone better was born from it. Better? Stronger, anyway. Braver. Someone who takes the worst thing that ever happened to her and turns it into the best thing that ever happened to other people." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "I still have nightmares sometimes. Still hear his voice. Still feel afraid when I shouldn't. That's normal. Healing isn't linear. I know, but I wish—" She stopped, shook her head. "Never mind. Wishing doesn't change anything. What were you going to say?" "I wish I'd been strong enough to fight back sooner. That I hadn't needed to run halfway across the country to find my courage." "Lydia, you ran halfway across the country, faked your own death, married a stranger, learned to shoot, and killed your abuser when he came for you. You stood in front of an entire town and told the truth about what happened to you. You've spent 2 years building something that helps people who were where you were." Caleb turned to face her fully. "That's not late courage. That's exactly on-time courage. You fought back the moment you could, and you haven't stopped fighting since." Tears shone in her eyes, but she was smiling. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't. I just tell you what I see, and I see someone who survived hell and decided to make sure others wouldn't have to." They went back inside together, back to the warmth and light and community. And as the evening wore on, as people shared stories and made plans and celebrated small victories, Caleb realized something. This was the life he'd been looking for when he came west. Not the isolation and independence he thought he wanted, but connection, purpose. A reason to keep fighting that went beyond personal survival. Lydia had given him that. Or maybe they'd given it to each other. Either way, he was grateful. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Caleb stood in the yard of a ranch that had grown into something remarkable. What had started as a simple cattle operation was now a working farm, a training center, a refuge, and a hub for the frontier women's movement that Lydia had helped create. The house was full of voices, women who'd come for the monthly gathering, sharing experiences, learning skills, building networks. In the barn, a group practiced marksmanship, while another learned basic law and their rights under the new territorial statutes. In the field, kids played while their mothers attended workshops on everything from farming techniques to legal advocacy. It was loud, chaotic, vibrant. Everything Caleb's solitary life had never been. And he loved it. Lydia emerged from the house, now wearing simple frontier clothes instead of Boston finery, her hair pulled back, practical and loose, her face tanned from sun and work. She looked nothing like the pale, frightened woman who'd arrived 5 years ago. She looked like she belonged. "Another good turnout," she said, surveying the activity. "We're going to need to build another dormitory if this keeps growing. Already talked to Robert about it. He's sending over lumber next week. You're too good to me, Caleb Ward. Just practical. Can't help people if we don't have room for them." She laughed, that free sound he'd never heard in the early days. "Still pretending this is all practical business? Isn't it? Maybe at first, but somewhere along the way, it became more. Became a calling." She looked at him. "For both of us." He couldn't argue with that. Somewhere between defending Lydia and building this community, he'd found his purpose. Not just protecting one woman, but creating a place where all women could find protection, strength, and voice. "I've been thinking," Lydia said, watching the women in the field, "about writing a book. The full story, everything that happened, everything I learned, everything we've built here, so it can reach beyond Wyoming, beyond the West, so women everywhere can know that escape is possible, that survival is possible, that fighting back is possible. Publishers might not want to print it. Too controversial. Then I'll print it myself. Use Ashford's money for something that would make him furious. She grinned fierce and bright. The ultimate revenge, using his wealth to empower every woman he ever tried to control. You've gotten devious in your old age. I've gotten free. Deviousness is just a side effect. They stood together, watching their strange, beautiful community go about its work. Women learning to shoot, learning to read, learning to demand better. Kids growing up seeing their mothers strong instead of broken. Men learning that true strength meant supporting, not dominating. It wasn't perfect. There were still setbacks, still challenges, still nights when Lydia woke from nightmares or moments when fear crept back in. Healing wasn't simple or complete, but it was real, and it was spreading. Word of Medicine Bow and what Lydia had built there had reached across the country. Other communities started similar programs. Other women stepped forward with their own stories. The conversation about domestic violence, which had been whispered in shadows, was now being shouted in daylight. And at the center of it all was a woman who'd been told she was powerless and had proven that nothing could be further from the truth. As the sun climbed higher and the day's activities got into full swing, Caleb returned to his work. There were always fences to mend, livestock to tend, practical matters that kept the operation running. But he did it with satisfaction now, knowing every task supported something larger. That evening, after the workshops ended and most of the visitors had headed home or to the dormitories, Lydia found Caleb on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Another successful day," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "You say that every day, because it's true every day. We're still here, still helping people, still making a difference." She was quiet for a moment. "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" "I haven't thought about Jonathan in weeks, months maybe. He used to be the first thing I thought of every morning, the last thing before sleep. This constant presence, even dead. But somewhere along the way, he faded. Became just a part of my past instead of my whole identity. That's called healing. It's called victory." She looked at him, eyes bright in the fading light. "He thought breaking me would make me his forever, but I broke free instead. And now everything I do, every woman I help, every change we make, it's all proof that he lost. Completely. Finally." Caleb reached over, took her hand. "He lost the moment you stepped on that stagecoach. Everything after was just you winning bigger." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the ranch, over Medicine Bow, over the frontier that had given them both a second chance at life. And in that silence, Caleb reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. He'd placed an ad for a mail-order bride out of loneliness and practical need. She'd answered it out of desperation and fear. What should have been a simple transaction had become a revolution, because Lydia Mercer, the frightened victim who'd faked her death, had died in that fire after all. But Lydia Ward had risen from those ashes, fierce and unbreakable. And she'd shown the world that survivors weren't weak, weren't damaged beyond repair, weren't less than they'd been before. They were warriors, every single one. And their battle had only just begun, but unlike the battles Caleb had fought in the war, battles of conquest and destruction, this was a battle of creation, building instead of burning, empowering instead of dominating, giving voice instead of silencing. It was the kind of battle worth fighting, the kind that changed things not just for a moment, but for generations. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lydia squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything, for believing me when no one else would, for standing with me when it was dangerous, for helping me become who I was meant to be. You did that yourself." "Maybe, but I couldn't have done it alone." She stood, stretched. "I should go check on the evening group. Some new arrivals came in this afternoon. They'll need orientation." "Need help?" "Always." They went inside together into the warm light and noise of a house full of life and hope and possibility. And as Caleb helped Lydia welcome the new women, listened to their stories, offered comfort and practical support, he understood something fundamental. This was the life he'd been meant to live. Not the solitary existence he'd planned, but this messy, complicated, beautiful community of broken people becoming whole. And Lydia, his wife in name and partner in purpose, had made it all possible. Not by being saved, but by saving herself. And then using that hard-won strength to save others. In the unforgiving Wyoming frontier where survival was never guaranteed and second chances were rare, Lydia Mercer had done the impossible. She'd escaped a monster, killed him when he came for her, and built something beautiful from the ruins he'd left behind. She'd transformed from victim to survivor to warrior to leader. And her revolution had only just begun. The end of her fear was just the beginning of her power. And that power, shared, taught, spread across the frontier and beyond, would change the world in ways Jonathan Ashford could never have imagined. Not through violence or domination, but through truth and courage, and the unshakable conviction that no one deserved to live in fear. That was Lydia Ward's legacy. Not just survival, but transformation. Not just escape, but victory. And every woman who heard her story, who found strength in her example, who chose to fight instead of flee, they were all part of that legacy. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where the past could be left behind, where new identities could be forged, where second chances were possible for those brave enough to seize them. Lydia had seized hers with both hands and refused to let go. And in doing so, she'd proven that the strongest chains weren't made of iron or law or money. They were made of fear. And fear could be broken.